"Help me, brother," I whispered, as I stumbled to my brother's place in the dead of a freezing winter night. My clothes were tattered, and I cradled a baby in my arms. My brother's face went pale at the sight of me, frail, disheveled, clad only in a ragged shirt and barefoot. "What on earth happened?" he exclaimed, quickly ushering me inside and warming up the room. The baby, wrapped snugly in my jacket, slept soundly, but it couldn't stop shivering. "Who did this to you, my precious little sister?" my brother muttered through clenched teeth. "Lily, it's going to be okay now." Upon hearing his gentle voice, a wave of relief washed over me, and it felt as if all my strength had drained away. "My name is Lily. I'm a 27-year-old homemaker with a young son. I used to be a nurse, but I left my job when Terry, the son of the hospital director where I worked, proposed to me. I was drawn to Terry's kindness and his efficient work style. I have a brother, Derek, who is 5 years older than me. Our family consists of Derek and our grandparents since our parents died in a car accident when I was 4 and Derek was in 3rd grade. A truck driver, who had fallen asleep at the wheel, collided head-on with their car. My mother, a nurse, had been working late, and the accident happened when my father went to pick her up. Derek often recalls our father's last words before leaving that night. "Derek, I'm counting on you to take care of Lily." What might have been a casual request turned into a lifelong commitment for my brother. He has never let me down, always protecting me like a superhero. After the accident, it seemed we would be sent to separate foster homes, but our paternal grandparents, with whom we had little contact before, stepped in to take us. Our grandfather, with his white hair and long bushy beard, looked just like Santa Claus. When he first saw Derek, he muttered, "You're the spitting image of your father," and I believe I saw tears in his eyes. Our grandmother, a kind woman, hugged me tightly and sobbed, "Poor child." Later, I learned that our father had a falling out with our grandfather and left home, seeking freedom instead of continuing the family business. This led to a long estrangement, but our grandparents took us in despite the past. We moved to their home nestled in the rural mountains. Our grandfather, a renowned potter whose works fetched thousands of dollars, and our grandmother, whose kindness knew no bounds, raised us without financial difficulties. Under their care, Derek and I grew up happily. Derek went off to a prestigious university in the city, while I attended nursing school. We both pursued our dreams until our grandmother's health began to decline. Derek, who had been working in the city, returned home to help care for her. I wanted to return home too, but since I was still a student, Derek advised against it. Derek had always been interested in our grandfather's work, but our grandfather had firmly encouraged him to follow his own path, which led Derek to attend university. I believe our grandfather regretted forcing our father to continue the family business and didn't want his grandchildren to go through the same experience. However, Derek insisted on learning pottery from our grandfather. He had always been handy and pottery suited him well. Besides, Derek excelled in everything, academics, sports, and he was popular among his friends. He was truly a superhero. While taking care of our sick grandmother, Derek also learned the trade from our grandfather. After I graduated from nursing school, I started working as a nurse. It was then that Terry proposed to me and we got married. Our wedding was grand, and the joyous smiles of Derek and our grandfather are what I remember most. Derek brought pictures of our parents to the wedding. "We all just want you to be happy, Lily, including our late mom and dad," he said, shedding tears openly. Our grandmother, too ill to attend, cried tears of joy when she saw the video of the ceremony. I was truly blessed with a great family. I quit my job as a nurse, moved into Terry's family home, and began to support him as a full-time homemaker. We had a child, and my husband was kind. We were living a happy life. Until then, my life had seemed to be smooth sailing. I couldn't even imagine the hellish days that were to come. Not long after, my grandmother passed away. Terry attended the funeral with me and comforted me. My grandfather's disappointment was severe. I couldn't find the words to speak to him. While I was busy supporting our grandfather, my brother Derek delved deeper into his pottery. Half a year had passed when I found myself fleeing to Derek's place in the middle of a freezing winter night, wearing nothing but ragged clothes, holding a baby in my arms. As Derek beheld my drastically changed appearance, he was rendered speechless. I stood there, so thin and weak, clad only in a tattered shirt, barefoot. "What on earth happened?" he finally managed to say, ushering me inside and warming up the room. The baby, wrapped in my coat, slept soundly, but I couldn't shake off the shivers that racked my body. Who did this to my dear sister? Derek muttered through clenched teeth. A wave of relief washed over me upon hearing his voice, as if all strength had drained from my body. I didn't want to burden Derek or our grandfather, but I had no choice. I had to tell them. I began to recount the events at my in-laws' house. Terry and I had been living together, but due to my in-laws' insistence that I rest during and after pregnancy, we moved in with them. My in-laws, both remarried, welcomed us warmly. My father-in-law's kindness was particularly touching, as I had no father of my own. However, my mother-in-law seemed to harbor resentment. "You're flirting with my husband, aren't you, you disgusting woman?" she accused, launching into a campaign of verbal and physical abuse. She disparaged my upbringing, asserting that I could never blend in with their family's affluent background. As if that weren't enough, I found myself facing additional challenges due to a shortage of staff at the hospital. As a former nurse, I often found myself called in to assist at the hospital alongside my husband, Terry. However, during this time, I noticed something deeply unsettling. Terry, being the son of the hospital director, took it upon himself to reprimand the nurses in an unreasonable manner. "Move quicker. You're a nurse getting paid, aren't you? Don't slack off just because my father is lenient. Once I take over this hospital, I won't be so forgiving," he would bark at them. His harsh words towards the hardworking nurses were unreasonable and unjust. Attempting to intervene, I interjected, "Terry, don't you think that's too harsh? Everyone here is trying their best." Unfortunately, my husband didn't take kindly to my interference. In front of the other nurses, he flew into a rage, furious that I had dared to stand up to him. Since that incident, Terry became distant towards me, perhaps influenced by my mother-in-law, who had been insinuating from the start that I was too soft on your wife and that I was taking you for granted. Meanwhile, my father-in-law, though unable to openly oppose his wife, did what he could to protect me. Unfortunately, when my father-in-law fell seriously ill and became bedridden, the situation worsened. Seizing the opportunity, my mother-in-law made me take on all the household chores, treating me like a mere housekeeper. I found myself juggling caring for my son, cooking, laundry, and cleaning, all while enduring mistreatment. Even in front of my ailing father-in-law, my mother-in-law's cruelty knew no bounds. "Please don't speak to Lily that way," he would weakly protest, only to be met with her venomous retorts. Her abuse escalated, and I found myself being deprived of basic dignity. "Housekeepers don't eat with the family. Eat the leftovers later," she commanded, forcing me to subsist on scraps. Despite the hardships, I endured it all for the sake of my son and my ailing father-in-law. I was so distraught that I lost my appetite. When I glanced in the mirror, I was taken aback by the gaunt and worn reflection staring back at me. My husband's words cut deep. "I only married you because you were somewhat attractive, but I never imagined you become such a disheveled woman," he sneered, insisting that I relocate from our bedroom to the storage room. The cruelty was staggering. The verbal abuse didn't stop with me, it extended to our son. "Of course he's not smart. Look at who his mother is," my mother-in-law would scoff. "His constant crying is annoying. Make him stop right now," my husband demanded. It felt like something inside me had snapped. Determined to escape, my sole concern was my father-in-law's well-being. However, to my surprise, he urged me to flee to my brother's place. Pressing several $100 bills into my hand, he insisted I leave immediately. Without hesitation, I wrapped my son in my coat and hailed a taxi with the money my father-in-law had given me. I rushed to my grandfather's house, where I poured out the entire ordeal to him and my brother Derek. Derek, his usually calm demeanor replaced by a furious expression I had never seen before, clenched his fists in anger. Assuring me that things would be okay, he said, "You've been through so much. It's time to relax." Overwhelmed with emotion, I broke down in tears. Even my grandfather, typically reserved, muttered, "I can't forgive this." A few days later, leaving my son under my grandfather's care, I made the decision to return to my in-laws' house with Derek to retrieve my belongings. Having left abruptly without a word, I anticipated trouble upon our return. My husband greeted me with a cold gaze and muttered, "You finally returned, huh?" Derek, maintaining his composure, calmly stated, "My sister seems very distressed, so we'll be taking care of her for a while. We've come today to collect some of her personal belongings." To this, my husband retorted, "I married her, so if she doesn't come back, there will be no one to do the chores." That's a big problem for me. Looking down on Derek, my mother-in-law remarked, I heard you do pottery. It must be a tough life. Even if you take care of my daughter-in-law, it's going to be difficult for you, right? Please send her back. It's a problem for us too. I could see Derek struggling to contain his anger as we requested to retrieve our belongings. Directed to a storage room in the corner of the hallway, which served as my room, we found it cramped and neglected. Cardboard boxes and old appliances cluttered the space, with only a few changes of clothes for me and my son. There were no heating appliances, just a thin blanket and mattress. Derek, visibly shaken by the harsh conditions, confronted my mother-in-law. Is this where you've shoved my dear sister and her child? Her reply was callous. She should be grateful just to have a room. She's just a housekeeper after all. Eager to leave, yet concerned about my father-in-law, I wished to see him. He greeted me warmly and quietly handed me something, expressing his regret for not being able to protect me. For several days, we made preparations, and with my grandfather and Derek by my side, I returned to my in-laws' house. Determined to stand up for my son, I knew I couldn't keep running away forever. Upon arriving home, I handed my husband the divorce papers. His initial surprise quickly turned to defiance as he declared he wouldn't pay alimony or child support, claiming I had chosen to leave. To support my case, I played a recording in front of his mother, an audio documenting her belittling me and him shouting abuse. This is evidence of the abuse I suffered, I informed them. Their shock was palpable as they asked when I had even recorded this. It turned out my father-in-law had discreetly recorded everything to help me, passing the recording to me when I collected my belongings earlier. My brother Derek, who had graduated from law school and passed the bar exam while assisting our grandfather, assured me that I had grounds for divorce. He promised to fight for me wholeheartedly. As the tension escalated, my wheelchair-bound father-in-law appeared, handing divorce papers to my mother-in-law. He, too, had recorded the verbal abuse he endured and was now ready to divorce. Preferring life in a care facility over living with my mother-in-law, he asserted his decision firmly. My mother-in-law's reaction was unexpected. She laughed and declared her willingness to divorce as well, eager to return to her luxurious life. However, the situation took a dramatic turn when my grandfather made a call, announcing his termination of any contracts with a family like ours. It emerged that the major department store, run by my mother-in-law's brother, was on the brink of bankruptcy. He had been negotiating to exhibit and sell my grandfather's famous pottery, and the deal was close to finalization. However, a call from her brother, severing ties with her, left my mother-in-law stunned. Realizing the gravity of her situation, she began to plead for forgiveness, admitting her wrongdoing. At that moment, it became clear that change was inevitable. I have nowhere else to go. Please let me stay here, Lily. I'm sorry. Please forgive me, my mother-in-law pleaded tearfully. But forgiveness seemed out of reach for us. We all coldly stared at her, unmoved by her tears. Yet amidst the tension, my husband seemed oblivious to the gravity of the situation. I'm set to inherit this hospital. If you want a divorce, I'll pay alimony and child support. I'll marry someone younger and prettier than you, he said to me, his words laced with arrogance. However, my father-in-law interjected with a single sentence that changed everything. The hospital has been sold, he declared, his eyes widening in shock. What? My husband's face drained of color as my father-in-law revealed that Terry had been orchestrating behind the scenes. Get out of here right now, my father-in-law screamed at his stepson. My husband, not legally adopted by my father-in-law, had no claim to his assets. In contrast, I, legally adopted by my father-in-law, had been well cared for. Realizing the tide was turning against him, my husband quickly changed his tune, pleading for a fresh start with me, but I coldly dismissed him. Afterward, my son and I found solace and happiness at my grandparents' house. With each passing day, my son cried less, finding joy in playing outdoors. Meanwhile, the divorce proceedings were finalized, the audio tape proving crucial in establishing my mother-in-law's fault. They now live in a small rented apartment, their attempts at finding new jobs faltering. On the other hand, my grandfather enjoys comfort in a high-end senior home, where we visit him often. Terry continues his passion for pottery under my grandfather's guidance. Remarkably, my brother found love at a pottery exhibition, dating a woman with a passion for pottery. As for me, I work as a nurse at a hospital near my grandfather's house, fulfilling my dream inspired by my mother's legacy.
I always believed in the power of a well-laid plan. As a mother of two with a career in project management, planning was not just a skill, it was my lifeline. But some moments in life, no matter how meticulously you plan, spiral in directions you never anticipated. The birth of my third child was one such moment. It was a balmy evening in late August when I sat down with my husband Mark to finalize the birth plan. Our living room was quiet, a rare occurrence in a house usually filled with the rambunctious laughter and chaos of our two sons, aged 4 and 6. They were at my mother's house for the night, a small but significant detail in the tapestry of our plan. "Okay, so when I go into labor, you'll drive me to the hospital, and Mom will be there with us, right?" I confirmed with Mark, who nodded, his eyes scanning the spreadsheet I had created. "And your mom will pick up my mother, the kids, and Graham from Mom's house. Everyone's on board with this?" I asked, seeking one last confirmation. "Absolutely," Mark reassured me, squeezing my hand. "Your mom in the delivery room, my mom bringing the boys, and your grandmother. Everyone knows their roles." The plan was a delicate balance, crafted over months of discussions and negotiations. For both my previous deliveries, my mother had been my rock, guiding me through the storm of childbirth with a calmness that seemed almost supernatural. Especially after my last delivery, where complications had left me fighting for my life, her presence had been my anchor. I needed her there, again, for the birth of our daughter. Our daughter. The thought brought a smile to my face, mingling with the undercurrent of anxiety that had been my constant companion throughout this pregnancy. After 2 boys, the prospect of a girl had brought a new dimension to our family dynamic, one that filled me with both excitement and a hint of nervousness. "Everything will go as planned," Mark said, his voice laced with confidence I desperately wanted to mirror. "Your mom has been through this with you twice already. She wouldn't miss it for the world." I nodded, allowing his assurance to settle my frayed nerves. The plan was solid. Everyone was on board, and all we needed was for nature to take its course. But as the night grew deeper, and our house settled into a quiet that felt both comforting and eerie, I couldn't shake off a nagging sense of unease. Little did I know, that unease was a premonition of the turmoil that lay ahead. It was a crisp morning in early September, the kind that hinted at the impending shift from summer to autumn. The sky was a canvas of soft blues and grays as I awoke to a familiar pressure in my lower back, a dull, rhythmic pain that had become an old acquaintance over the past few months. But this morning it felt different, more insistent, as if nudging me towards a realization. It took me a moment, amidst the haze of sleep, to understand. The baby was coming. Mark was already up, a silhouette against the dim light of dawn, when I whispered, "It's time." The urgency of the moment swept us into a well-rehearsed routine. While I focused on my breathing, Mark called our mothers. "We're headed to the hospital. It's time," he said, his voice a blend of excitement and nervousness. To my mother-in-law he added, "Please pick up Mom, the kids, and Graham. Remember the plan." I clutched the phone, wanting to hear my mother's voice. "I'm on my way, sweetheart," she said, her voice calm and steady, a balm to my escalating anxiety. The drive to the hospital was a blur. Mark's steady hand on mine was the only anchor I had as waves of contractions began to wash over me. Each wave was a crescendo of pain and anticipation, a reminder of the life I was about to bring into the world. We arrived at the hospital as the sun peaked above the horizon, casting a golden glow that felt like a good omen. The nurses greeted us with practiced smiles, ushering us into a delivery room that felt both alien and strangely welcoming. "Your mom will be here soon," Mark reassured me as he helped me into the hospital gown. The sterile scent of the room mingled with my growing fear. I needed my mother there, her presence a vital piece of my mental armor against the pain and fear. Minutes turned into an hour, and still there was no sign of my mother. The contractions were intensifying, a relentless tide that left me breathless and scared. Mark tried to soothe me, but his words were a distant echo against the roaring in my ears. Finally the door opened, but it wasn't my mother who walked in. It was my mother-in-law, alone, her face a mixture of excitement and something I couldn't quite place. My heart sank. "Where's Mom?" I managed to ask, my voice strained. She's not coming. I thought it would be better to let everyone rest. It's still early," she said, settling into a chair as if this were just a minor change in plans. The realization hit me like a physical blow. She had unilaterally decided to alter the plan, to deny me the one person I needed most. Panic and anger surged through me, drowning out the pain of the contractions. "Mark, I need my mom. Please call her. She needs to be here," I said, my voice barely a whisper amid the chaos of emotions. As Mark stepped out to make the call, I was left with my mother-in-law, her presence a stark reminder of the support I had been denied. In that moment, the delivery room felt more like a prison, a place where my carefully laid plans and hopes were crumbling around me. The room seemed to close in on me, the walls inching nearer with every ticking second. My mother-in-law sat there, scrolling through her phone, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. The pain of each contraction was now intertwined with a piercing sense of betrayal. She had disregarded our plan, our agreement, and I felt abandoned in my most vulnerable moment. "Why didn't you bring my mom?" I asked, my voice laced with pain and anger. "She was supposed to be here. I need her." My mother-in-law looked up, her expression one of surprise, as if the weight of my words was lost on her. "I thought it would be best to let everyone sleep. It's not a big deal, honey. I'm here for you," she said, her tone attempting comfort but only fueling my frustration. "Not a big deal?" I repeated, disbelief sharpening my words. "You changed everything. I don't need you here. I need my mom." The room was spinning, a carousel of pain and anger. I clutched the bedsheets, trying to anchor myself to something, anything. The contractions were coming faster now, a relentless tide that left no room for respite. My mother-in-law's face hardened. "Your mother had her chance with your other births. It's my turn now. I'm just trying to be fair." "Fair?" I gasped, the word a bitter laugh. "This isn't about fairness. This is about what I need. And I need my mom." Mark returned, his face etched with worry. "Your mom is on her way. She'll be here as soon as she can," he said, taking my hand. But the damage was done. The sanctity of this moment, the birth of our child, had been tainted by a selfish act that I couldn't forgive. "I want her out," I said, nodding towards my mother-in-law. "She has no place here." The confrontation escalated. My mother-in-law refused to leave, her justifications a cacophony in the chaos of my labor. It wasn't until a nurse, sensing the rising tension, intervened that she was finally escorted out. Alone with Mark, I tried to focus on the impending birth, but the seeds of resentment had been sown. Each passing minute was a reminder of the trust that had been broken, of the support that had been selfishly withheld. When my mother finally arrived, the relief I felt was tempered by a lingering bitterness. She swept into the room like a soothing breeze, her presence a balm to my frayed nerves. But as she held my hand and whispered words of encouragement, I couldn't shake off the shadow that had been cast over this moment. The joy of welcoming a new life into the world was overshadowed by a sense of loss, not just for the plan that had fallen apart, but for the family harmony that had been shattered. As my daughter took her first breath, her cries a melody of new beginnings, I knew that the rift that had formed would not be easily mended. As the hours passed, the delivery room became my world, a microcosm of pain and perseverance. The absence of my mother during those initial hours had left a void, one that was only partially filled when she finally arrived. Her comforting touch and familiar voice were a lifeline, but they couldn't erase the undercurrent of betrayal that flowed through me. My mother-in-law's decision to ignore our plan, to prioritize her desires over my needs, had sown seeds of resentment that took root deep within me. Even as my mother soothed me, her words of encouragement mingling with the clinical instructions of the nurses, my mind kept returning to that betrayal. I felt robbed of the peace and support I had so carefully orchestrated for this moment. Labor is a storm. It is raw and primal, a test of endurance and strength. But this time, it was also a battlefield of emotions. The physical pain of childbirth was amplified by the turmoil in my heart. Each contraction was a reminder of the support I had lost, the trust that had been broken. Mark was a constant presence, his hand a steady warmth in mine. But his attempts to comfort me seemed to falter in the face of my internal struggle. He was torn between his roles as a husband and a son, his own emotions a mix of concern, frustration, and helplessness. As I navigated the waves of labor, I found myself grappling with more than just the pain of childbirth. There was a sense of mourning for the experience I had envisioned, but lost. The joy of welcoming a new life was intertwined with grief for the harmony that had been shattered. In those long hours, my world reduced to the confines of that hospital room. The concept of time became elusive. Each minute stretched and contracted, marked only by the rhythm of my labor and the flood of emotions that accompanied it. When the moment of birth finally arrived, it was as if a storm had broken. The pain reached a crescendo, a tidal wave that threatened to overwhelm me. But through it all, there was a sense of determination, a resolve to bring my child into the world despite the chaos that surrounded her arrival. My daughter's first cry was a sound of pure, unadulterated life. It cut through the fog of pain and resentment, a clarion call that anchored me back to reality. As they placed her on my chest, her tiny body warm and quivering, I felt a surge of love that momentarily pushed aside the bitterness. But even as I held her, marveling at the miracle of her existence, the joy was tainted. The presence of my mother, comforting as it was, couldn't fully compensate for the absence of my other loved ones. The promise I had made to my sons, to have them there to meet their sister, was unfulfilled. And the gap that had formed between me and my mother-in-law seemed like a chasm too wide to bridge. In those first moments with my daughter, amidst the swirl of conflicting emotions, I knew that the journey ahead would be about more than just adjusting to life with a new baby. It would be a journey of healing, of navigating the complex terrain of family dynamics and personal hurt. The days following the birth of my daughter were a whirlwind of emotions. Joy, exhaustion, love, and an undercurrent of resentment all melded into one indescribable feeling. My daughter was perfect, a tiny bundle of life that brought a new sense of purpose and love. Yet the shadow of what transpired in the delivery room lingered, casting a pall over what should have been unadulterated happiness. As we settled back home, the reality of the situation began to fully sink in. My mother-in-law's actions had not only affected the birth of my daughter, but had also left a rift in our family. The resentment I felt towards her was a constant presence, an uninvited guest in every interaction. My husband, caught in the middle, struggled to navigate the tension. He tried to mediate, to bridge the gap that had formed between his mother and me. But the betrayal I felt was too deep, too raw to be easily soothed. His attempts, though well-intentioned, often felt like an added pressure to forgive and forget, to move on for the sake of family harmony. The reactions from the rest of the family varied. Some understood my anger, while others, like my mother-in-law, seemed baffled by the depth of my resentment. She didn't mean any harm, they would say, or she just wanted to be a part of the experience. But their words fell on deaf ears. The trust I had placed in her had been broken, and with it, the easy camaraderie we once shared. My mother, ever the peacemaker, encouraged me to talk it out with my mother-in-law. She's family, she reminded me. But the thought of facing her, of having to articulate the pain and betrayal I felt, seemed like an insurmountable task. The wound was still too fresh, the emotions too volatile. The most painful aspect of it all was the impact on my children. They had been excited to meet their sister at the hospital, a promise we had made but couldn't keep. Their disappointment was a reminder of the wider repercussions of my mother-in-law's actions. It was a lesson in the complexities of adult relationships that I wished they hadn't had to learn so soon. In those first weeks, as I navigated the challenges of caring for a newborn, the emotional turmoil added an unexpected layer of difficulty. The usual challenges of sleepless nights and endless diaper changes were compounded by a sense of loss, not just for the birth experience I had envisioned, but for the family unity that had been compromised. As time passed, the initial intensity of my anger began to fade, giving way to a lingering bitterness. The joy of my daughter's presence was a balm, but it couldn't entirely heal the rift that had formed. The relationship with my mother-in-law had been altered irrevocably, and I found myself grappling with the reality of what that meant for our family's future. In the weeks that followed, the rawness of my emotions began to dull, replaced by a persistent ache. The birth of my daughter, a time that should have been filled with pure joy, was overshadowed by a lingering sense of what had been lost. The relationship with my mother-in-law, once warm and cordial, had cooled into something distant and strained. Mark, ever the optimist, believed time would heal the rift. He encouraged conversations, family dinners, attempts to bridge the gap that had formed. But each interaction with my mother-in-law was a reminder of the trust that had been broken. Her presence, once comforting, now served as a trigger for the hurt and anger that bubbled beneath the surface. My mother, a constant source of support, urged me to find a way to forgive. "Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die," she would say, quoting a phrase she had always believed in. But the path to forgiveness seemed obscured, hidden beneath layers of hurt and betrayal. The dynamics within our extended family had shifted. Family gatherings, once a source of happiness and unity, now felt like navigating a minefield. Conversations were cautious, laughter forced, as if everyone was acutely aware of the undercurrents of tension. As for my children, they adapted to their new sister with the uncomplicated love that only children possess. They were blissfully unaware of the complexities of the adult relationships around them. Their innocence was a reminder of what was at stake, of the family harmony that needed to be restored, not just for my sake, but for theirs as well. In an attempt to find closure, I eventually agreed to a sit-down with my mother-in-law. It was a difficult conversation, filled with unspoken emotions and carefully chosen words. She expressed her perspective, her desire to be a part of the birth, and her belief that she had been making the best decision at the moment. I listened, the words washing over me, but found it hard to fully accept her explanations. The decision she made had been about her needs, not mine, and the repercussions were something I was still grappling with. The conversation ended with a tentative truce, an agreement to try and move forward for the sake of the family. But the ease of our previous relationship was gone, replaced by a cautious civility. In the months that followed, I focused on my family, on the joy that my daughter brought into our lives. Mark and I navigated the complexities of parenthood and our extended family dynamics, finding a new normal in the altered landscape of our relationships. The path to forgiveness and healing was not a straight one. It was filled with setbacks and moments of doubt. But with each passing day, the bitterness began to recede, giving way to a cautious hope for reconciliation. I realized that forgiveness was not a single act, but a process, a journey that required patience, understanding, and the willingness to see beyond the hurt. It was about finding peace, not just for myself, but for my family, a peace that was necessary for us to move forward, to rebuild the bonds that had been strained but not completely broken. Months turned into a year, and as the seasons changed, so did the dynamics within our family. The birth of my daughter, an event that had been marred by betrayal and conflict, slowly receded into the background, becoming a part of our family history, but not defining it. My relationship with my mother-in-law, once a source of warmth and support, had changed fundamentally. We had reached a point of civility, a mutual understanding that was more about coexistence than the closeness we once shared. I had learned to accept her presence in family gatherings, to engage in polite conversation, but the trust that had been broken was not easily rebuilt. The process of healing had been slow, a journey of introspection and understanding. I had grappled with my anger, the sense of betrayal, and the need to protect myself and my children from further hurt. But I had also come to recognize the value of family, of the intricate web of relationships that, despite their flaws, formed the tapestry of our lives. Mark had been my rock throughout this journey, a source of unwavering support and love. His ability to navigate the tension between his wife and mother, to provide comfort and understanding to both, had been nothing short of remarkable. Together, we had found a way to move forward, to focus on the joy and love that bound our family together. The lessons I had learned were not just about forgiveness, but about the complexities of human relationships. I had come to understand that people, even those closest to us, can make choices that hurt us deeply. But holding on to anger and resentment only served to prolong the pain. Forgiveness, I realized, was not about condoning the actions of others, but about freeing myself from the hold of negative emotions. It was a gift I gave myself, a way to find peace and move forward. As I watched my daughter grow, her milestones a series of joyful discoveries, I was reminded of the resilience of the human spirit. Her laughter, uninhibited and pure, was a balm to the lingering wounds of the past. Our family had changed, but it had also grown stronger in unexpected ways. We had learned to navigate our differences, to find a balance between the need for individual respect and the importance of family unity. As I reflect on the journey, on the pain and the healing, I am reminded of the unpredictability of life and the resilience it demands. The experience with my mother-in-law, though fraught with challenges, taught me invaluable lessons about empathy, boundaries, and the complex nature of love and forgiveness. Looking back, I see not just a story of conflict, but one of growth and understanding. It's a narrative that underscores the fact that while we cannot control the actions of others, we can choose how we respond to them. My response, ultimately, was to embrace forgiveness, not for the sake of my mother-in-law, but for my own peace of mind and for the well-being of my family. As I watch my children play, their laughter echoing in our home, I'm reminded of the importance of moving beyond past hurts. In their innocence and joy, they embody the spirit of forgiveness and the endless capacity for love. They are a constant reminder that despite life's trials, our capacity to love and to heal is boundless. This journey has also reinforced the importance of clear communication and setting boundaries. My experience has taught me to be more vocal about my needs and expectations in relationships, ensuring that my voice is heard and respected. In the end, the story of my daughter's birth is not just about a moment of betrayal. It's a testament to the power of healing and the strength of the human heart. It's about finding a way to coexist and maintain family ties, even when they are tested by conflict and
The crystal champagne flute shattered in my father's grip, sending shards and expensive bubbles across our mahogany dining table. My 30th birthday dinner had just transformed into a nightmare. I'm Blair, and this was supposed to be my milestone celebration. Instead, my mother Charlotte chose this moment to present me with an envelope containing what she claimed was evidence of my theft from the family business. The accusation hung in the air like poison. "Explain this," my father Harold demanded, his face turning that dangerous shade of red I'd grown to fear since childhood. He thrust the papers toward me, his hands trembling with rage. "I don't understand," I said, scanning the documents. They showed wire transfers, account statements, and a series of transactions I'd never seen before. "These aren't mine. I've never—" "Don't lie to me!" Harold slammed his fist on the table, making everyone jump. My sister Lindsay grabbed my hand under the table, squeezing it tight. "Harold, darling, please calm down," my mother said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I'm sure Blair can explain why she's been siphoning money into offshore accounts." I looked into my mother's eyes and saw something I'd never noticed before, a glint of satisfaction. That's when I knew. This was no mistake. This was calculated. "This is insane," I said, standing up. "I haven't stolen anything. Someone's setting me up." "The evidence is quite clear," Charlotte sighed, touching my father's arm. I didn't want to believe it either, but the numbers don't lie. Nearly $2 million, Blair. "What were you thinking?" Lindsay gasped beside me. $2 million? "I've already spoken with the board," Harold growled. "You have 24 hours to confess and return the money, or you're not only fired, you're out of this family." "Dad, please." "No." He stood up, towering over me. "I've given you everything. A position in the company, trust, responsibility, and this is how you repay me?" I looked around the table at the faces I'd known all my life. My father, veins pulsing in his neck. Lindsay, tears streaming down her cheeks. And my mother, wearing that perfect mask of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I didn't do this," I said firmly, "and I can prove it." Charlotte's expression flickered for just a moment, so brief I almost missed it, but it was there. Fear. "There's nothing to prove," she said quickly. "The evidence is conclusive." "Then you won't mind if I hire my own forensic accountant to review everything?" I challenged, watching her carefully. "Every transaction, every document, every signature?" "That won't be necessary," Charlotte cut in. "We've already had everything verified." "By whom?" I demanded. "Enough?" Harold roared. 24 hours, Blair. Not a minute more." I grabbed my purse and stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "You want the truth, Dad? Ask your wife where she was last Tuesday between 2 and 4 p.m. Ask her about the safety deposit box at First National. Ask her why she's so desperate to push me out of the company right now." Charlotte's face went white. Bull's eye. Get out, Harold said, his voice deadly quiet. Get out of my house. I walked to the door, then turned back one last time. Happy birthday to me, right? Don't worry, Mom. I'll make sure this is a celebration you'll never forget. The heavy front door slammed behind me with satisfying force. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd hoped I'd never have to use. Ricky, it's Blair. Remember that favor you owe me? I need it now, and I need you to connect me with Emerson Fox. I got into my car and started the engine, my mind racing. My mother thought she was so clever, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She didn't know about the photos I'd taken last week or the conversations I'd recorded. She had no idea I'd been watching her for months, gathering evidence of her own schemes. She wanted to play games? Fine. But she'd forgotten who taught me how to play. As I pulled away from the mansion I'd grown up in, my phone buzzed with a text from Lindsay. What's really going on? I typed back quickly, truth time, sis, but not over text. Meet me tomorrow at the Blue Room, 10 a.m. Come alone. The city lights blurred as I drove, my mother's satisfied smirk burning in my memory. She thought she'd won, thought she'd finally found a way to push me out and take complete control. But she had no idea what was coming. Sometimes the best revenge isn't served cold. It's served with proof. And I had plenty of that. The Blue Room was nearly empty when Lindsay walked in, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She looked like she hadn't slept, dark circles visible even under carefully applied concealer. You look terrible, I said as she slid into the booth across from me. Yeah, well, watching our family implode will do that. She grabbed my untouched coffee and took a long sip. Start talking, Blair. What did you mean about Mom and the safety deposit box? I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo. This is Mom entering First National last Tuesday. Notice the timestamp, 2:15 p.m. She told Dad she was at her charity board meeting. That doesn't prove anything, Lindsay said, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. No, how about this? I swiped to the next photo. Here she is meeting with James from accounting, the same James who verified those transactions in my name. Lindsay's hands started trembling. Blair, if you're suggesting what I think you're suggesting, Mom's been planning this for months, I said, keeping my voice low. Remember when Dad had that health scare last year? She's been positioning herself ever since, trying to gain more control of the company. I'm the only thing standing in her way. But why? Dad gave her everything she wanted. I laughed bitterly. Not everything. She wants to sell the company. Dad would never agree to that. It's his legacy. But with me discredited and you already focused on your own career, she could convince him to retire, Lindsay finished, realization dawning on her face. Oh God, Blair. The waitress appeared with fresh coffee, and we fell silent until she left. There's more, I said, pulling out a small recorder. Listen to this. Charlotte's voice filled our quiet corner. James, I need those documents modified exactly as we discussed. Blair's signature needs to be perfect. Yes, the payment will be made as agreed. No one will ever know. Lindsay's face went pale. When did you record this? Last week. I've been watching her ever since I overheard her talking about handling the Blair situation on the phone. Why didn't you tell Dad? Would he have believed me? I asked. You know how he is with her. She's got him wrapped around her finger. The cafe door chimed, and I looked up to see my father walking in. My heart stopped. Speaking of the devil, I muttered. Harold spotted us and strode over, his face set in hard lines. Lindsay, go home. Dad, wait. Now. Lindsay shot me an apologetic look and squeezed my hand before leaving. Harold took her place in the booth. You've got some nerve, he said, trying to turn your sister against your mother. I'm not turning anyone against anyone, I replied. I'm just showing her the truth. The same truth I'm going to show you if you'll listen. The only truth I need to see was in those documents last night. Those documents are fake, Dad. Mom orchestrated this whole thing. His face reddened. Watch yourself, Blair. That's your mother you're talking about. Yes, my mother who's trying to frame me for embezzlement so she can push me out and convince you to sell the company. That got his attention. What did you say? You heard me. Why do you think she's been meeting with Vernon Industries? Those weren't charity lunches, Dad. They were acquisition talks. You're lying, he said, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. I pulled out the photos and the recorder. Am I? Take these. Listen to them. Look at the evidence yourself, but do it privately, where she can't explain it away. He stared at the items for a long moment before slowly taking them. If you're wrong about this, he warned. I'm not, but if I am, I'll sign a confession and walk away from everything. You have my word. Harold stood up, tucking the evidence into his jacket pocket. 24 hours, Blair. That hasn't changed. One more thing, I called as he turned to leave. Check Mom's calendar for next Tuesday. She has another meeting scheduled with Vernon Industries. Might want to show up unannounced. He left without responding, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. The seed of doubt was planted. My phone buzzed with a text from Ricky. Meeting set with Emerson. 2 p.m. today. His office. I smiled. Emerson Fox had been my father's business partner for 30 years. He also had his own history with my mother, one she thought nobody knew about. If anyone could help me expose the truth, it would be him. I left enough cash on the table to cover both coffees and headed for the door. As I stepped outside, another text came through, this one from an unknown number. Back off while you still can. Some secrets should stay buried. I screenshot the message and saved it to my evidence folder. Mom was getting nervous. Good. Time to pay Emerson a visit and show him exactly what Charlotte had been up to. After all, he deserved to know how she was planning to sell off the company he'd helped build. Let the games begin. Emerson's corner office hadn't changed in 20 years. Same leather chairs, same view of the city skyline, same smell of expensive cigars. He stood as I entered, his silver hair catching the afternoon light. Blair, he said, gesturing to a chair. I must admit, I was surprised to get your message. Not as surprised as I was to find these, I replied, sliding a manila envelope across his desk. He opened it slowly, his expression changing as he examined the contents. Photos of my mother leaving Vernon Industries, copies of emails discussing company valuations, and a draft purchase agreement with his name conspicuously absent. Where did you get these? His voice was carefully neutral. Does it matter? They're real, and you know it. I leaned forward. She's planning to cut you out, Emerson, just like she's trying to cut me out. He sat back, rubbing his temples. Your mother always was ambitious. That's one word for it. I have another, criminal. Those are dangerous accusations, Blair. So is falsifying documents to frame your daughter for embezzlement. I pulled out my phone and played the recording of Charlotte and James. Emerson's face darkened with each word. Damn it, Charlotte, he muttered. Then louder, what do you want from me? The truth, about everything, including what happened between you and my mother 15 years ago. His head snapped up. How do you... I found the letters, I said, hidden in that old filing cabinet in the basement. Very passionate stuff, Emerson. Does Dad know? That was a long time ago, he said quietly. A mistake. A mistake she's been holding over your head ever since, right? That's why you've looked the other way while she's been making these backdoor deals. He stood up abruptly, walking to the window. Your father is my best friend. Then help me save his company. Help me stop her before she destroys everything he's built. The intercom buzzed. Mr. Fox, Mrs. Mitchell is here to see you. Emerson and I locked eyes. He pressed the intercom button. Send her in. Hide, he hissed at me, pointing to the adjacent conference room. I slipped inside just as my mother's voice filled the office. Emerson, darling, we need to talk about Blair. Yes, we do. His voice was cold. Sit down, Charlotte. Through the crack in the door, I watched my mother settle gracefully into a chair. She's making wild accusations, trying to turn everyone against me. You haven't heard from her, have you? Would it matter if I had? Of course it would. She's unstable, Emerson. The stress of the company, the pressure, it's affected her judgment. These delusions about me trying to sell the company. Like these delusions? He dropped the Vernon Industries documents on the desk. Charlotte's composure cracked for just a second. Where did you get those? Does it matter? They're real, aren't they? Emerson, please. You know how Harold is about the company. He'll never agree to sell, even though it's the smart move. Sometimes we have to guide people to the right decision. By framing your daughter for embezzlement? She laughed, but it sounded hollow. Is that what Blair told you? And you believed her? Remember who knows your secrets, Emerson. Remember what's at stake. Are you threatening me, Charlotte? I'm reminding you where your loyalties should lie. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. Don't make me an enemy, Emerson. You won't like the consequences. After she left, I emerged from the conference room. Emerson looked years older. Well, I said, that was illuminating. She'll destroy us all, he muttered. Not if we stop her first. I sat down across from him. I need access to the company's financial records. All of them, going back 5 years. That's impossible without board approval, unless the request comes from a board member. I raised my eyebrows meaningfully. He stared at me for a long moment. If I do this, there's no going back. Your mother will know exactly who helped you. She's already threatening you, Emerson. What more can she do? He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a security badge. Level 10 access. It'll get you into the records room after hours. But Blair? He caught my arm as I reached for the badge. Be careful, your mother isn't the only one with secrets in those files. I took the badge, tucking it into my pocket. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This could end badly for all of us. As I turned to leave, he called out, Blair, for what it's worth, I'm sorry about everything. I nodded and left his office, my mind already racing with plans. Tonight, I'd get the proof I needed, but first I had to call Ricky. If I was going to break into the company records room, I'd need his expertise in digital security. My phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. You're playing a dangerous game. Ask Emerson what really happened the night of the merger. I smiled. Finally, a real lead. Time to find out what other skeletons were hiding in the family closet. You know this is insane, right? Ricky's voice crackled through my earpiece as I swiped Emerson's badge at the records room door. It was 11 p.m. and the office floor was deserted. Less talking, more hacking, I whispered. Are you into the security system? Almost there. Cameras are on loop. You've got 30 minutes before the system resets. The door clicked open and I slipped inside. Rows of filing cabinets lined the walls, with a computer terminal in the center. Okay, I'm in. Talk me through this. Boot up the terminal, I'll remote in and bypass the login. I followed his instructions, watching as the screen came to life and codes scrolled past. How did you get so good at this stuff anyway? Let's just say my previous job wasn't entirely legal. Found it, accessing files from the merger period now. Documents started populating the screen. Financial reports, board meeting minutes, and... Wait, stop, go back to that email thread. My heart pounded as I read the exchange between my mother and the Vernon Industries CEO from 5 years ago. Ricky, are you seeing this? Holy shit, he breathed. They've been planning this takeover for years. And look who else was copied on these emails. James from accounting. He's been helping her cook the book since before Dad's health scare. Blair, there's something else. Check the attachment on that last email. I clicked it open and froze. It was a photograph of Emerson with a woman who wasn't his wife, dated just weeks before the original merger. The email text was simple. Insurance policy. Keep this safe. She's been blackmailing him, I said. That's how she kept him quiet all these years. Suddenly, the lights flicked on. I spun around to find Lindsay standing in the doorway, her face pale. What are you doing here? I hissed. Following you, she said, stepping inside. Blair, you need to stop this. Ricky, I'll call you back, I said, pulling out my earpiece. Mom knows what you're doing, Lindsay continued. She's furious. She said she'll press charges if you don't back off. Let her try. I gestured to the screen. Look at this, Lindsay. Look what she's been doing. She approached hesitantly, scanning the emails. Her hand flew to her mouth. That's not... She wouldn't... She did. She's been playing everyone for years. Dad, Emerson, us. We're all just pieces in her game. But why? We have everything we could want. Because everything isn't enough for her. She wants control. Complete control. Lindsay sank into a chair. What are you going to do? First, I'm going to copy all of this. I plugged in a USB drive. Then I'm going to... The computer screen suddenly went black. No. I frantically pressed keys. What happened? Someone remotely shut it down. I grabbed the USB drive. How much did it copy? Blair. Lindsay's voice shook. Your phone. I looked at my screen to find a new message. Nice try. Check your email. My inbox loaded to reveal dozens of photos. Me breaking into the records room, accessing files, copying data. The subject line read, "Corporate espionage is a serious crime." She knew, I whispered. She knew I'd come here. We need to leave, now. Lindsay pulled my arm. Wait. I ran to the filing cabinets, yanking open drawers. There has to be hard copies. Blair, please. Found it. I pulled out a thick folder labeled Merger Documents, Original. Inside was everything. The real agreements, undoctored financial statements, and... What's that? Lindsay pointed to a sealed envelope that had fallen to the floor. I picked it up. The handwriting on the front was familiar. Dad's. It was dated the day before his health scare, addressed to Emerson. Take it, Lindsay urged. We can read it later. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. We killed the lights and pressed ourselves against the wall as a security guard walked past, his flashlight beam sweeping the room through the window. Once he passed, we slipped out and ran to the emergency stairs. We didn't stop until we reached my car in the parking garage. What the hell do we do now? Lindsay asked, breathing hard. Now? I pulled out my phone and dialed. Now we talk to Dad's lawyer. Violet needs to see this. Blair. Lindsay grabbed my hand. I'm sorry I didn't believe you before, about Mom. It's okay, but Lindsay, I met her eyes. This gets worse before it gets better. Are you with me? She nodded slowly. I'm with you. My phone buzzed again. Last warning. Back off or tomorrow's board meeting will be very uncomfortable for everyone, especially Harold. I started the car, my mind racing. The board meeting, of course. That's when she planned to make her move. We've got 12 hours, I told Lindsay. Time to see what's in Dad's letter. As we pulled away, I caught a glimpse of movement in my rearview mirror, a figure watching from the shadows. The game was changing, and tomorrow would decide everything. Violet's home office smelled like old books and expensive perfume. At 6 a.m., she looked impossibly put together in a crisp suit, reading Dad's letter with narrowed eyes. This changes everything, she said finally, placing the letter on her desk. How bad is it? I asked. Your father knew. She tapped the paper. He knew about the planned takeover, about Charlotte's manipulation, everything. He was gathering evidence before his health scare. Lindsay gasped. Are you saying Mom was responsible for Dad's heart attack? The letter suggests she may have been tampering with his medication. Violet's voice was grim. Harold suspected but couldn't prove it. That's why he wrote to Emerson. Insurance, in case anything happened to him. My hands shook with rage. She tried to kill him. And now she's trying to destroy you, Violet said. The board meeting is in 5 hours. What's your plan? I pulled out the folder from the records room. We have proof of her dealings with Vernon Industries, evidence of cooking the books, and now this letter. It's enough to stop her. It's enough to put her in prison, Violet corrected. But timing is crucial. Charlotte will expect you to make a move at the meeting. Then we'll make our move before. I turned to Lindsay. Call Dad. Tell him to meet us at Violet's office in an hour. It's time he knew everything. Lindsay stepped out to make the call. Violet leaned forward. Blair, there's something else you should know. Your mother came to see me yesterday. What did she want? To draft new company bylaws. Ones that would give her full control if Harold becomes incapacitated again. My blood ran cold. She's planning something for today. Almost certainly. Violet opened her laptop, which is why I took the liberty of contacting some old friends at the SEC. They're very interested in these financial discrepancies. Lindsay burst back in, face pale. Dad's not answering. I called the house. The housekeeper says Mom took him to the hospital an hour ago. Something about chest pains. No, I breathed. Not again. I grabbed my purse. Violet. Go, she said. I'll handle the board meeting delay. Just get to your father. We raced to the hospital, breaking every speed limit. In the elevator, my phone buzzed with a message. Too late, darling. Should have backed off when you had the chance. The ICU waiting room was empty except for my mother, who looked up with perfectly feigned concern. Oh, girls, thank goodness you're here. What did you do? I snarled. Blair. She stood up, affronted. Your father had another episode. Thank God I was there to call the ambulance. Like you were there last time? I stepped closer. What was it this time, Mom? More medication tampering? Her eyes flickered to Lindsay, then back to me. You're hysterical. The stress is clearly affecting you. Mrs. Mitchell? A doctor approached. Your husband is asking for you. Of course. She smiled sweetly. Girls, wait here. Family only for now. We are family, Lindsay snapped. The board meeting starts in 4 hours. Charlotte reminded me softly. Such a shame you'll miss it, waiting here at the hospital. I'll be sure to express your regrets. As she turned to follow the doctor, I grabbed her arm. This isn't over. Oh, sweetheart. She patted my cheek. It was over before it began. The moment she disappeared down the hall, I pulled out my phone. Ricky, I need you to hack the hospital security cameras. Right now. On it, he said. What am I looking for? My mother, anywhere near my father's room or the pharmacy in the last hour. Lindsay paced nervously. Blair, what if she really does something to him? She won't, I said more confidently than I felt. She needs him alive to maintain control. This is just to keep us away from the board meeting. My phone buzzed. Emerson calling. Tell me you got my message, he said when I answered. What message? The board meeting. Charlotte changed the venue. It's happening at Vernon Industries in 30 minutes. What? That's not possible. It's 4 hours early. She called an emergency session. Blair, they're voting on the sale right now. I looked at Lindsay, who nodded. Go, I'll stay with Dad. Send me the address, I told Emerson. And Emerson, stall them, whatever it takes. I ran for the elevator, dialing Violet as I went. Meet me at Vernon Industries. Bring everything. It's happening now. Racing through traffic, I called Ricky again. Tell me you found something. Better, he said. I found the pharmacy tech she bribed. He's willing to talk. Send his statement to Violet. Another text flashed on my screen. Running out of time, Blair. Just like Daddy. I gripped the steering wheel harder. Mom thought she had all the pieces in place, but she'd forgotten one thing. I had nothing left to lose. The Vernon Industries building loomed ahead, its glass towers reflecting the morning sun. Somewhere in there, my mother was about to destroy everything my father had built. Not if I could help it. The Vernon Industries security guard tried to stop me, but Emerson was already waiting in the lobby. 14th floor? He said as we rushed to the elevator. They're about to call the vote. Did you do what I asked? He patted his breast pocket. Recording device as requested. Caught every word of Charlotte's private meeting with the Vernon CEO before the board arrived. The elevator seemed to crawl. How bad? She promised him insider information about our overseas contracts. Illegal as hell. Perfect. My phone buzzed. Lindsay, Dad's awake. He's asking for you. The elevator doors opened to chaos. Board members clustered in small groups, whispering urgently. My mother stood at the head of the conference table looking triumphant. Blair, she said smoothly, how nice of you to join us, though I'm afraid you're not authorized to be here. Actually, Violet's voice rang out as she strode in behind me. She is. As a victim of corporate fraud, she has every right to address this board. Charlotte's smile tightened. There's nothing to address. The vote is about to begin. The vote is suspended, Violet announced, dropping a thick folder on the table. Pending a federal investigation. The room erupted in murmurs. Charlotte laughed, but I caught the fear in her eyes. Investigation into what? Fraud, embezzlement, attempted murder. I stepped forward. Should I go on, Mom? These are ridiculous accusations. Play the tape, Emerson. He pulled out the recorder, and Charlotte's voice filled the room. Once Harold's out of the picture, permanently this time, the board will have no choice but to approve the sale. The color drained from her face. That's doctored. Like the evidence you planted to frame me? I turned to the board. Check your emails. You'll find proof that Mrs. Mitchell has been secretly negotiating this sale for years, manipulating company finances and attempting to eliminate anyone who stood in her way. Phones began buzzing as Ricky's mass email hit their inboxes. Including her own husband, Violet added. The call came during my lunch break. I was sitting in my usual spot by the window at work, unwrapping my sandwich, when Bella's sobs crackled through my phone speaker. My 10-year-old never cries like this. "Baby, slow down. What happened?" "Pumpkin's gone," she choked out between hiccups. "Grandma and Grandpa, they took her to the shelter while I was at school." My stomach dropped. The sandwich fell from my numb fingers as rage and disbelief collided in my chest. "They did what?" They said she was too much trouble." Bella's voice cracked. "Mom, please come home. Please help me get her back." I was already grabbing my purse, my hands shaking. "I'm on my way, sweetheart. Don't move." "Fiona?" My colleague Trent appeared at my cubicle, concern etched on his face. "Everything okay?" "My parents just gave away my daughter's cat without telling either of us." The words tasted bitter. "I have to go." "Jesus, that's messed up." He helped me gather my things. "Let me know if you need anything." The drive home was a blur of white-knuckled steering and suppressed screams. How dare they? My parents were watching Bella after school while I worked, a temporary arrangement until summer camp started next week. They had no right. But they'd always been like this, hadn't they? Making decisions for everyone else, steamrolling any objection with their certainty that they knew best. I'd spent my whole life under that thumb. Bella flew into my arms the moment I walked in. Her face was blotchy, her dark curls wild. "We have to get her back, Mom. Pumpkin must be so scared." "We will, baby, I promise." I held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Where are Grandma and Grandpa?" "They left after dropping me off. Grandma said to tell you they did what needed to be done." Of course they had. Hit and run, their specialty when they knew they'd crossed a line. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "That cat was destroying our furniture when Bella stayed over. This is for the best. You'll see." I wanted to throw my phone across the room. Instead, I called the local shelters while Bella huddled against me on the couch. The third call hit pay dirt. "Yes, we had an elderly couple bring in an orange tabby about 2 hours ago," the shelter worker confirmed. "But I'm afraid she's already been adopted. A family came in right after and fell in love with her." My heart sank as I looked at Bella's hopeful face. Is there any way to contact them? This was a huge mistake. The cat was taken without our permission. "I'm so sorry, but we can't give out adopter information, and they've already left with her." Bella crumpled when I told her. I held her as fresh sobs racked her small body, my own tears falling into her hair. Pumpkin had been her companion for 3 years, a tiny kitten we'd rescued from behind our apartment building. Now she was just gone. My phone kept buzzing. More texts from my mother. "Don't make this into a drama. You're too soft with her. She needs to learn about life's disappointments." I silenced the notifications, sick to my stomach. But as I scrolled through my banking app to see if we could maybe afford another cat soon, something caught my eye. A transfer I didn't recognize. $5,000 moved from my savings to my parents' account last week. My hands started trembling again as I dug deeper. There it was, a pattern of transfers going back months. Small amounts at first, growing larger. Money I hadn't authorized, money I hadn't even known was missing. The familiar weight of their control pressed down on my chest. How long had they had access to my accounts? What else had they been doing behind my back? Bella had cried herself to sleep against me, her cheeks still damp. I stroked her hair, thinking of all the times I'd swallowed my own tears as a child, accepting their decisions because they knew best. Looking at my daughter's tear-stained face, something hardened inside me. This wasn't just about a cat anymore. This was about patterns that needed to break before they could sink their claws into another generation. I carefully shifted Bella onto the couch and covered her with a blanket. Then I opened my laptop and started taking screenshots of every unauthorized transfer. My parents had always been so careful to maintain their image of benevolent authority. Time to see how that image held up under real scrutiny. They thought they could just sweep this under the rug like everything else. But they'd finally gone too far, and I was done being the dutiful daughter who never pushed back. I spent the night on the couch next to Bella, afraid she'd wake up crying for Pumpkin. Around dawn, my phone lit up with an incoming call. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I stepped onto the balcony, closing the door softly behind me. "Have you calmed down?" Her voice had that familiar, patronizing tone. Really, Fiona, you're making this into something it's not. Like you're making my money into something it's not? The words shot out before I could stop them. Want to explain the transfers from my account? A pause. Oh, that. We were going to discuss it with you. Your father and I have been managing some investments. Managing? You mean stealing? The morning air felt too thin. You had no right to touch my money. Don't be dramatic. We're your parents. Everything we do is for your own good. She sighed like I was being unreasonable. You've never been good with finances. Remember that credit card disaster in college? My cheeks burned. I'd been 19, stupid with my first card. They'd swooped in to fix it and never let me forget it. I'm 35 years old. I have a daughter. You can't keep treating me like a child. Speaking of your daughter, she needs structure. That cat was just the start of the problems. Where's my money? I cut her off. All of it. I want it back by the end of the day. Don't take that tone with me. Her voice sharpened. Your father and I will come over this evening to discuss this properly. You're clearly too emotional right now. The call ended. I gripped the railing, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of fury. They were coming here. Of course they were. They never could resist the chance to corner me in person. Inside, Bella was stirring. I pulled myself together, made her favorite chocolate chip pancakes. She pushed them around her plate. Can we put up missing cat posters? Her voice was small. Maybe the family that took Pumpkin will see them. My heart cracked. Baby, I don't think... A knock at the door made us both jump. I opened it to find Krista, my oldest friend, holding a tray of coffee cups. Trent called me, she said, pushing past me. Said you might need backup today. Relief flooded through me. Krista had known my parents forever, had witnessed their helpful interference countless times. She handed Bella a hot chocolate and pulled me into the kitchen. Spill, she commanded. Everything. I told her about the cat, the money, the impending visit. Her expression darkened with each detail. Classic Hallie and Clyde, she muttered. Remember when they accidentally submitted college applications for you behind your back, only to programs they approved of? I did remember, just like I remembered them helping me break up with my high school boyfriend and suggesting which job offers to take and advising me on where to live. Look what I found this morning, I said, pulling up my email. They used my social security number to open a credit card last year. They've been using it for their expenses. Krista's eyes widened. That's identity theft fee. That's actually illegal. I know. My hands were shaking again. But they're my parents. They'll say they were trying to help to build my credit or something. They always have a reason. Screw their reasons. Krista grabbed my shoulders. This isn't help. This is control. And now they're messing with Bella's happiness too? In the living room, Bella was curled up in her favorite chair, listlessly scrolling through old pictures of Pumpkin on her tablet. The sight steeled something in me. I need a lawyer, I said quietly. Someone who can help me understand my options. I might know someone. Krista was already typing on her phone. But your parents are coming tonight? I nodded. To discuss everything. You know how those discussions go. Then you need a plan. She looked me dead in the eyes. And you need to record everything they say. Because this time, they're not just stomping all over your boundaries. They've committed actual fraud. My stomach lurched. The thought of deliberately gathering evidence against my own parents felt wrong. Felt like betrayal. But then, what had they been doing to me all these years? Mom? Bella appeared in the doorway, hugging herself. Can we at least go look for Pumpkin? Maybe drive around the neighborhood? I started to explain why that wouldn't work, but stopped. My parents had taken enough hope from her already. Sure, baby, we can try. I met Krista's eyes. After we make a quick stop at the bank. Because tonight, when my parents arrived to steamroll me back into compliance, they were going to find something different waiting for them. Someone different. They'd taught me well about family loyalty. Time to show them exactly what I'd learned. The bank manager's sympathetic expression was starting to wear thin. I understand your frustration, Ms. Vasquez, but since your parents are authorized users on these accounts... Authorized? I leaned forward. I never authorized anything. She tapped at her keyboard, turned the monitor toward me. This paperwork was filed 6 months ago. That's your signature. I stared at the document, my signature perfect and precise. Too perfect. I didn't sign this. Mom, Bella tugged at my sleeve. We'd had to bring her along. No time to find a sitter. Can we go look for Pumpkin now? The manager's eyes softened at Bella's tear-stained face. I squeezed my daughter's hand. Soon, baby. Just a few more minutes. Krista, who'd been quietly observing, spoke up. Can we get copies of all the account documentation for review purposes? The manager hesitated. I recognized that look, the same one people always got when dealing with my parents. That mixture of doubt and deference. They had a way of making everyone second-guess themselves. I'll need to confirm with our legal department, she said finally. My phone buzzed. A text from my father. Your mother is very upset. We raised you better than this. Something snapped. I grabbed a pen from the manager's desk and scrawled my signature on a deposit slip. Compare these. Really look. She glanced between the slip and the monitor, frowning. There are differences. They forged my signature. My voice shook. They committed fraud, and I need you to help me prove it. 2 hours later, we left with a thick folder of documents. Bella had fallen asleep in one of the plush lobby chairs, exhausted from crying. Krista helped me carry her to the car. The lawyer can see you at 4, she said, buckling Bella in. I'll watch her while you go. I shook my head. I can't leave her, not after... Fee. Krista gripped my shoulders. You need to do this, for both of you. The lawyer's office was cool and quiet, all sleek lines and leather chairs. Ashton, the lawyer Krista recommended, reviewed the bank documents while I tried not to fidget. This is clear fraud, he said finally. But are you sure you want to pursue this? Cases involving family can get messy. They took my daughter's cat to the shelter without permission. The words still felt surreal. They've been stealing my money. What else have they done that I don't know about? He nodded slowly. Let's start with a forensic accounting review. See exactly what we're dealing with. My phone buzzed again. Mother. We'll be there at 7. Your father is very disappointed in your behavior. I showed Ashton the text. They're coming tonight to discuss everything. Don't let them in. His response was immediate. Don't engage at all until we understand the full scope of their actions. But as I left his office, another text arrived. This one from my father, with a photo attached. My heart stopped. It was an old picture of me at 19, mascara streaked down my face, holding a maxed-out credit card statement. The day they'd saved me from my financial mistakes. Remember who's always been there to fix your problems, the text read. Don't make this ugly. I sat in my car, hands trembling on the steering wheel. They'd kept that photo all these years, kept it as ammunition. When I picked up Bella from Krista's, she was playing with Krista's new kitten. The sight of her sad smile broke something in me. Baby, I said softly, how would you feel about staying at Aunt Krista's tonight? Her eyes widened. But what about when Grandma and Grandpa come? I need to talk to them alone first, about grown-up things. Are you going to get Pumpkin back? I couldn't lie to her. I don't know, but I'm going to try to make sure nothing like this happens again. Back home, I started gathering papers, bank statements, credit card bills, anything that might help build my case. In my parents' guest room, where they stayed when visiting, I found more, documents with my signature that I'd never seen, financial statements addressed to me, but opened. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 p.m. Through the peephole, I saw them standing there, mother perfectly coiffed, father adjusting his tie, looking exactly like the respectable, concerned parents they'd always presented to the world. I thought of that photo they'd kept, of all the times they'd used my past mistakes to keep me in line, of Bella's tears this morning. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door, but only partway, keeping the chain on. We need to talk, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, but not here, and not on your terms, not anymore. You're being ridiculous. Mother's voice carried through the gap in the doorway. Let us in so we can sort this out like adults. Adults don't forge signatures, I said. Adults don't steal money or give away other people's pets. Everything in your life that's going well is because of our guidance. Father's tone was gentle, reasonable, the voice he used when explaining why my choices were wrong. You're upset about the cat. We understand, but do you want to explain the credit card you opened in my name? I watched their expressions shift. Or should we discuss that with the police? Mother's face hardened. You wouldn't dare. Try me. I closed the door on their protests, my heart hammering. Through the window, I watched them retreat to their car, heads bent in discussion. They wouldn't give up easily. They never did. My phone lit up with a text from Trent. How are you holding up? I sent back a quick, still breathing, before collapsing onto the couch. The house felt too quiet without Bella, without Pumpkin's little chirping meows. Another text arrived, an unknown number. My breath caught as I read it. Hi, I'm Amy from Sunshine Shelter. About the orange tabby brought in yesterday. Can you call me? I called immediately, hands shaking. Yes, hello, this is Fiona. I wasn't supposed to do this, Amy said quietly. But something felt off about how that cat was brought in. The couple who adopted her. They're good people. If you can prove the surrender wasn't authorized, hope fluttered dangerous wings. I wrote down the adopter's names and address, promised to handle it delicately. Then I called Ashton. Absolutely not, he said when I explained. No confronting the adopters directly. Let me handle this through proper channels. But, Fiona, his voice softened. I know you want to fix this for your daughter, but one wrong move could jeopardize everything, including the fraud case against your parents. I knew he was right, but sitting still felt impossible. I drove to Krista's, needing to see Bella. My daughter was asleep on Krista's couch, tear tracks still visible on her cheeks. Krista handed me a glass of wine. Your mom called me, she said. Tried to convince me you're having some kind of breakdown. I laughed hollowly. Of course she did. What else? She mentioned things about your ex, about why you really got divorced. The wine turned sour in my mouth. What did she say? That you drove him away with your emotional instability, that they had to step in to protect Bella. Krista watched me carefully. You never told me the whole story. Because it wasn't true. My hands were shaking again. They hated that I married him without their approval. I swallowed hard. They made sure he knew every mistake I'd ever made, every flaw, every reason he shouldn't trust me with Bella. Jesus, Fee. He left. They helped him get a good lawyer, helped him paint me as unstable. The memories still burned. I only kept custody because he didn't really want it. He just wanted to hurt me like they told him I deserved. Krista's face had gone pale. And you never fought back? They said they were protecting me, that they knew best. I looked at Bella, peaceful in sleep. I believed them for so long. My phone buzzed. Mother again. But this time, she'd sent an email. Subject line, what we found in your old diaries. The preview showed a photo, pages from my teenage journal, detailing a party where I'd gotten drunk, done things I'd rather forget, things I'd never told anyone but those private pages. They'd kept my diaries. All this time, they'd been holding on to ammunition. What is it? Krista asked, seeing my face. They're going to try to destroy me. My voice sounded distant, like they did with my marriage. They'll use everything they have. Then you need to strike first. Krista's voice was steel. You need to show Bella that bullies don't win, even when they're family. I thought of my daughter waking up crying for her cat, of all the times I'd swallowed my own tears because fighting back seemed impossible. I need your guest room, I said suddenly. For a while, for both of us. Of course. And I need you to help me move some things from my house, tonight, before they come back. Because they would come back, with their reasonable voices and their carefully curated evidence of my failures, with their practiced ability to make everyone doubt me. But this time would be different. This time I wasn't just fighting for myself. I picked up my phone and called Ashton again. I'm ready, I said. Whatever it takes, let's make them answer for everything. Moving in with Krista was supposed to be temporary, but as I packed our essentials at midnight, every childhood photo felt like an accusation. Had I always been this ungrateful daughter they claimed? Mom? Bella appeared in my doorway, rubbing her eyes. Are we running away? The question hit like a punch to the gut. No, baby, we're just taking some space to figure things out. Like when Dad left, I stopped folding clothes, really looked at her. She seemed smaller somehow, shoulders curved inward protectively. What was I teaching her about dealing with problems? This is different, I said, but the words felt hollow. Morning brought fresh chaos. Texts from my parents to half my contact list, concerned messages about my mental state, 3 voicemails from my father, each more wounded than the last. But it was the email from my mother that made my blood run cold. "Since you're determined to destroy this family," she wrote, "you should know we've contacted your employer about the concerning patterns we've noticed in your banking activity. As your authorized financial managers, we felt obligated to report potential irregularities." I called Trent immediately. "They already reached out to HR," he confirmed. "Fee, this is getting scary. You need to talk to someone in leadership before—" A call beeped through. My boss. My hands shook as I switched lines. "Fiona," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Can you come in? There are some concerns we need to discuss." The office felt different now. Hostile. I could feel eyes on me as I walked to the conference room, wondering what stories my parents had spread. My boss wasn't alone. HR sat with her, along with someone from legal. They had printouts of bank statements. My signature, again and again, on documents I'd never seen. "Your parents provided these," HR said gently. "They're worried about your state of mind, about possible financial improprieties." "They forged those signatures." My voice cracked. "They're the ones stealing from me. I can prove it. Nevertheless, given the sensitivity of your position and access to company accounts, we'll need to place you on administrative leave while we investigate." The room spun. Without my salary, how would I support Bella? Pay for her therapy? Fight this legal battle? I stumbled out to find Trent waiting. "I heard," he said. "Come on, let's get coffee." At the cafe across the street, he pushed a paper across the table. "I've been gathering something for you. Every time I noticed your parents' interference over the years, dates, incidents, witnesses, including that time your mother called our biggest client to discuss concerns about your project management. I remembered. The client had pulled their business. Mother had been so sympathetic about my failure. There's a pattern," Trent continued, "of sabotage masked as help. You're not crazy, Fee, and you're not alone." My phone buzzed. Ashton. "Check your email," he said when I answered. "Now." The subject line read, "Found something interesting." Inside was a scan of an old document, my parents' business loan application from 20 years ago. With my signature as guarantor, I stared at the date. I would have been 15. "That's just the start," Ashton said. "They've been using your identity for decades, building their success on your forged signature. If this goes public, they'll lose everything," I whispered. "Exactly. Which means they'll fight harder. Are you ready for that?" Was I? I thought of Bella asking if we were running away, of all the times I'd taught her to stand up to bullies at school while letting my own bullies control my life. "We need to move fast," I said, "before they can hurt anyone else." "Already on it, but Fiona—" Ashton paused. "The shelter called. The family that adopted Pumpkin. They're willing to meet, off the record." My heart leaped. "When?" "Tonight, but your parents can't know. If they interfere again, they won't." I looked at Trent's careful documentation of their manipulation, at the loan document that proved their decades of lies. I'm done letting them control my story. Back at Krista's, I found Bella drawing pictures of Pumpkin. She looked up hopefully as I entered. "Hey, brave girl," I said, sitting beside her. "Want to go on an adventure with me tonight? To meet some people who might be able to help us get Pumpkin back?" Her eyes lit up for the first time in days. "Really?" "Really. But first, I need you to know something." I took her small hands in mine. "Sometimes the people who say they're helping us are actually hurting us. And when that happens, it's not running away to protect yourself. It's being brave enough to say, no more." She nodded solemnly. "Like with Grandma and Grandpa?" "Like with Grandma and Grandpa," I confirmed. "And baby, I'm done letting them hurt us." The house was small but welcoming, with wind chimes tinkling on the porch and cheerful flowers in the garden. Bella clutched my hand as we approached the door. "What if they don't want to give her back?" she whispered. Before I could answer, the door opened. A woman about my age stood there, her kind face creased with concern. Behind her, I caught a flash of orange fur. "Pumpkin!" Bella cried. The cat's head popped up from a window perch, ears twitching at the familiar voice. She lipped down, trotting toward us with her distinctive chirping meow. "She's been crying for days. the woman, Sarah, said softly. Now I understand why. We sat in their living room, Pumpkin purring in Bella's lap, while Sarah and her husband Tom listened to our story. Their faces darkened as I explained about my parents, the unauthorized surrender, the pattern of control. We've gotten attached to her, Tom admitted, but she's clearly your cat. We can't keep her knowing she was taken wrongfully. Relief flooded through me. Thank you. You have no idea. My phone buzzed. Then Sarah's house phone rang. Hello? She answered. Her expression changed. Yes, this is Sarah. What? No, that's not. Hold on. She held out the phone to me, looking shaken. It's your mother. Of course it was. They'd somehow tracked us here. My hands trembled as I took the receiver. You're embarrassing yourself, Mother said without preamble. These nice people don't want to be involved in your drama, and now you're dragging your daughter into it? How did you... We've already explained to them about your emotional instability, about how you're not thinking clearly. Her voice dripped concern. Come home, darling. Let us help you through this episode. Bella was watching me, still holding Pumpkin. Sarah and Tom exchanged uncomfortable glances. No, I said firmly. You don't get to do this anymore. I hung up and turned to Sarah and Tom. Whatever they told you. They said you're having a breakdown. Tom said carefully. That you lost custody of your daughter once before. That's not... My voice caught. They helped my ex-husband try to take her. They've been manipulating everything for years. My phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. Your parents asked me to reach out. I think it's time we discussed Bella's well-being again. My ex-husband. They'd actually called him. Mom? Bella's voice was small. I don't want to see Dad. You won't have to. I pulled her close, Pumpkin sandwiched between us. I promise. Sarah touched my arm. We have a security camera. It recorded your parents bringing Pumpkin in. Everything they said. Would that help? I stared at her. You'd give me that footage? Of course. Her eyes were fierce. What they did wasn't right. Tom was already accessing their security system. I'll email you the video now, and we want to make a statement about how they misrepresented the situation. My phone kept buzzing. My parents, my ex, unknown numbers. But watching Bella with Pumpkin, seeing these strangers choose truth over manipulation, something crystallized inside me. I called Ashton. My parents contacted my ex, I said without preamble. They're going to try for custody again. I thought they might. He didn't sound surprised. Which is why I've been building our case. The fraud, the forgery, the pattern of parental alienation. But Fiona, if we do this, it has to be all the way. No backing down. They're at my workplace. They're calling everyone I know. They're trying to take my daughter. My voice hardened. I want them stopped. Then let's stop them. I'm filing the paperwork tomorrow morning. But you should know, your father just tried to empty your accounts. All of them. The last thread snapped. Did he succeed? No. The fraud alert we placed blocked it, but they're getting desperate. When we left Sarah and Tom's, Pumpkin secure in her carrier, Bella asked, Are we going back to Aunt Krista's? No, baby. We're going somewhere safer. I drove to the small extended stay hotel Ashton had recommended, checking us in under a different name. As Bella settled in with Pumpkin, I made one last call. Mother, I'm only going to say this once. Back off, or tomorrow everyone sees who you really are. The fraud, the forgery, everything. You ungrateful. I'm done being grateful for abuse. I hung up and blocked their numbers. Tomorrow would bring war, but tonight my daughter slept peacefully, her cat curled beside her. And for the first time in years, I felt truly, completely awake. The courthouse hallway felt too bright, too exposed. I smoothed my blazer for the 100th time, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. Krista sat beside me, holding my hand. Bella was safe at her house with Pumpkin, away from this mess. They're here, Krista whispered. My parents walked toward us, perfectly coordinated as always. Mother's pearl necklace gleamed like armor. Father adjusted his gold cufflinks, my graduation gift to him, bought with money they'd controlled. Fiona. Mother's voice carried down the hallway. This isn't too late to fix. I stood, legs shaking. You're right, it's not. Think about what you're doing, Father pleaded. To the family, to your daughter. I am thinking about my daughter. My voice grew stronger. I'm teaching her that love doesn't
My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted the baby monitor, ensuring every corner of the nursery was visible. It was the first time Jack and I were leaving our little Ethan alone since his birth 3 weeks ago. My mother-in-law, Mrs. Harper, had insisted we take a break, and reluctantly, I agreed. Before leaving, I carefully showed her Ethan's sleep sack, emphasizing how important it was not to use any blankets, especially near his face. "You're just being paranoid," she had chuckled, but I saw her nod, so I left, feeling a tad reassured. The cafe where Jack and I sat was cozy, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept glancing at my phone, the live feed from the baby monitor playing. Jack reached across the table, covering my hand with his. "He'll be fine," he assured me, but his words did little to soothe my anxiety. About an hour into our lunch, I noticed something on the monitor that made my heart skip a beat. Mrs. Harper was swaddling Ethan, not with the sleep sack, but with a blanket tightly wrapped around his hips. My instructions had been clear, and yet there she was doing the exact opposite. I felt a surge of anger mixed with fear. "Jack, we need to go." "Now," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We hurried back, finding Ethan asleep in his crib, the blanket still snug around him. Mrs. Harper greeted us with a smile, oblivious to my distress. "He just wouldn't settle without a swaddle," she explained. I bit back my frustration, nodding politely while inside I seethed. It was more than just a disregard for my instructions, it was a blatant disrespect for my role as Ethan's mother. Strike one, I thought bitterly. That night, as Jack slept soundly, I lay awake, Ethan's soft breathing the only sound in the dark room. The incident replayed in my mind, fueling a growing resolve. I needed to be firmer, set clearer boundaries. My child's safety was at stake, and I wouldn't let anyone grow, not even Mrs. Harper, undermine that. Weeks had passed since the first incident, and my trust in Mrs. Harper remained shaky. Yet, when Jack suggested another brief outing, a movie this time, I agreed, but with one addition: I had installed cameras in the house. It wasn't just about watching Ethan, it was about ensuring my instructions were followed. Before leaving, I walked Mrs. Harper through Ethan's routine again, stressing the importance of using the sleep sack and not swaddling him with a blanket. I also asked her to send me pictures or updates, as being away from Ethan still made me anxious. Her response was curt, almost dismissive. "Maybe, if I have time," she said, adding that I should keep my phone silent in the cinema. Her tone stung, and I left feeling a mixture of anger and helplessness. In the dim light of the movie theater, I found myself checking the live feed on my phone more than watching the screen. Mrs. Harper seemed to be taking adequate care of Ethan, but there were no messages, no pictures, nothing. Frustrated, I nudged Jack, whispering about what was happening. Reluctantly, he texted his mother, and only then did a couple of photos come through. It wasn't just about the pictures. It was her attitude, the way she disregarded my requests as if they were unimportant. After the movie, Jack tried to reassure me. "She sent the photos, didn't she?" he said, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't about the photos. It was about respect, about listening to the mother of the child she was caring for. I felt a growing rift, not just with Mrs. Harper, but with Jack too, for not understanding my concerns. That night, as I held Ethan close, feeding him before bed, I felt a deepening resolve. This wasn't something I could just let slide. My role as a mother was being questioned, my instructions ignored. It was more than just a simple disagreement, it was a fundamental clash of beliefs and values about how to care for my child. And I knew then that something had to change. In the weeks that followed, the tension between Mrs. Harper and me grew palpable. Each visit from her seemed to widen the gap of misunderstanding and distrust. Jack, trying to play the mediator, often found himself caught in the crossfire of our silent battles. The third strike came unannounced, on a seemingly ordinary afternoon. Mrs. Harper was babysitting Ethan while I caught up on some work from home. From my study, I could hear her cooing and talking to Ethan, a sound that should have brought comfort, but instead heightened my alertness. I decided to check on them, a decision that led to the ignition of a smoldering conflict. I found Mrs. Harper pulling Ethan's hands away from his mouth, her actions more forceful than necessary. "He'll become a thumbsucker if you let him do that," she scolded, not noticing my presence. I watched, horrified, as she aggressively shoved a pacifier into his mouth. My heart raced. This was not just about a pacifier or thumb-sucking. It was about her overstepping, controlling how I chose to raise my son. I confronted her then and there, my voice firm yet trembling with restrained emotion. "Mrs. Harper, it's perfectly normal for babies his age to explore with their hands. Please don't do that." Her response was a mix of disbelief and defiance. "I raised 3 children. I think I know what I'm doing," she retorted, her tone dismissive. The final straw came later that day when we argued about how to put Ethan to sleep. Despite my insistence on following pediatrician recommendations to lay him on his back, Mrs. Harper argued relentlessly for the old ways she was accustomed to. It was a clash of generations, of old beliefs versus new, scientifically backed practices. That evening, as I lay in bed, a torrent of emotions swept over me. Frustration, anger, helplessness. Jack, sensing my distress, tried to offer comfort, but his words felt empty. "She means well," he said, but that was no longer enough. Mrs. Harper's actions were not just infuriating, they were a direct challenge to my authority as Ethan's mother. I realized then that my relationship with Mrs. Harper had reached a critical point. I could no longer allow her to undermine my parenting choices, no matter her intentions. The safety and well-being of Ethan were paramount, and I was determined to protect that, even if it meant confronting and possibly alienating Mrs. Harper. My role as a mother was clear, and I knew I had to stand my ground for Ethan's sake. Spring brought with it a new challenge, one that threatened to upend the precarious balance I had managed to maintain with Mrs. Harper. During a casual family dinner, she announced her retirement, her voice laced with a mix of pride and anticipation. What followed, however, sent a jolt of anxiety through me. She offered to become Ethan's full-time caregiver, a proposition that caught me completely off guard. Jack seemed thrilled by the idea, seeing it as a perfect solution. "Think of the money we'll save on childcare," he said enthusiastically. But for me, the thought of leaving Ethan in Mrs. Harper's care every day was daunting. Her previous actions, her disregard for my parenting choices, echoed loudly in my mind. That night, as Jack slept soundly beside me, I lay awake, wrestling with the dilemma. On one hand, there were the undeniable financial benefits, and on the other, my deep-seated concerns about Mrs. Harper's approach to childcare. It wasn't just about differing opinions. It was about the safety and well-being of my son. I found myself torn between the pragmatic part of me that recognized the practicality of the offer and the maternal instinct that screamed against it. Could I trust Mrs. Harper to respect my wishes and care for Ethan as I wanted? The answer, based on past experiences, seemed grim. The days that followed were filled with internal debates and discussions with Jack, who couldn't understand my hesitation. "She's his grandmother. She won't do anything to harm him," he reasoned. But it wasn't about harm in the conventional sense. It was about respecting my role as Ethan's mother, about adhering to the practices and precautions I deemed necessary for his well-being. As spring blossomed into summer, the pressure to make a decision mounted. Mrs. Harper's offer hung over our household like an unspoken ultimatum, challenging my convictions as a parent. The thought of her becoming Ethan's primary caregiver filled me with a sense of foreboding. I knew I had to make a choice, one that would not only affect our current circumstances, but also define the boundaries of our family dynamics for years to come. In the end, the decision came down to a simple, yet profound realization. My responsibility as Ethan's mother was to ensure his safety and happiness, even if it meant making the difficult choice of saying no to Mrs. Harper. It was a decision that wouldn't be easy to communicate, but one that I knew was necessary. My resolve was clear, but the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. The decision to decline Mrs. Harper's offer weighed heavily on me, like a stone in my stomach. I knew what I had to do, but the thought of the impending confrontation filled me with dread. It wasn't just about saying no to her. It was about asserting my role as Ethan's mother and setting boundaries that had long been blurred. I approached Jack first, hoping to find an ally in him before facing Mrs. Harper. We sat down one evening after Ethan was asleep, the soft glow of the nightlight casting shadows across the room. "Jack, I've thought a lot about your mom's offer," I began, my voice steady but laced with anxiety. "And I've decided that it's not the best option for Ethan or for us." Jack looked surprised, maybe even a bit disappointed. But think about the money we'd save, he argued, echoing his earlier sentiments. I nodded, acknowledging the practicality of his point. I understand that, but this is about more than money. It's about Ethan's well-being and having our parenting choices respected, I explained, my words deliberate, conveying the seriousness of my concerns. The conversation that followed was difficult. Jack struggled to see my perspective, rooted in his trust and love for his mother. But as I laid out my reasons, highlighting the past incidents and Mrs. Harper's dismissive attitude towards my parenting choices, he began to understand. It wasn't an easy acceptance, but it was a start. With Jack's reluctant support, I braced myself for the conversation with Mrs. Harper. I invited her over for coffee, a neutral setting for what I anticipated would be a challenging discussion. As she sat across from me, sipping her coffee, I took a deep breath and spoke. Mrs. Harper, I appreciate your offer to take care of Ethan. It means a lot, but I've decided that it's best for us to continue with our current childcare arrangement. Her reaction was a mix of surprise and hurt, her brows knitting together in confusion. But why? I thought it would be perfect, she said, her voice tinged with disappointment. I explained my stance, carefully choosing words that conveyed respect but also firmness. It's important for me to have certain practices followed, and while I value your experience, I feel more comfortable sticking to the advice of our pediatrician and current childcare provider. The conversation was tense, with moments of silent understanding and others filled with veiled frustration. In the end, Mrs. Harper left with a polite goodbye, the air between us thick with unspoken words. As the door closed behind her, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. I had made my decision, set my boundaries, but at what cost? The future of our family dynamics hung in a delicate balance, but I knew that standing up for my beliefs and for Ethan's welfare was the right choice, no matter the challenges it might bring. The days following my conversation with Mrs. Harper were filled with an uneasy quiet. The air was thick with unspoken words and lingering tension, a silent storm brewing beneath the surface. It wasn't long before the storm broke. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. Mrs. Harper had come over for a visit, her demeanor cordial but distant. As she interacted with Ethan, I could sense her holding back, her movements cautious, as if walking on a tightrope. The atmosphere was strained, a stark contrast to the easy familiarity that had once defined our gatherings. Then, as Ethan fussed in his playpen, Mrs. Harper turned to me. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "I don't understand why you don't trust me with Ethan. I raised 3 children of my own." Her words hit me like a wave, pulling me into the undercurrent of our unresolved issues. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "It's not about trust, Mrs. Harper," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "It's about respecting the choices Jack and I make for Ethan. It's about his safety and well-being." What followed was a raw and honest exchange, the kind that had been simmering beneath the surface for months. Mrs. Harper expressed her feelings of being undervalued and misunderstood, while I shared my need for my role as a mother to be respected. We delved into our differing views on childcare, each of us standing our ground, yet trying to find common ground. The conversation was not without its moments of heat. Mrs. Harper's frustration was palpable, as was my determination to assert my authority as Ethan's mother. But amidst the contention, there was also a sense of mutual understanding beginning to form, a recognition of each other's concerns and emotions. As the afternoon waned, the tension gradually eased, leaving in its wake a fragile truce. We had not resolved all our differences, but there was a newfound respect for each other's perspectives. Mrs. Harper agreed to try to respect my parenting decisions, and I acknowledged her experience and love for Ethan. That day marked a turning point in our relationship. It was the beginning of a journey towards mutual respect and understanding, one that would require patience, empathy, and open communication. The confrontation had been challenging, but it had opened the door to a potential path of reconciliation and compromise, a path that I hoped would lead to a more harmonious family dynamic. In the weeks that followed our confrontation, the dynamic within our family began to shift, subtly yet significantly. The air of tension that had once clouded our interactions with Mrs. Harper started to dissipate, giving way to a cautious but growing sense of understanding. Mrs. Harper's visits became more frequent, but they were different now. There was an unspoken agreement between us, a delicate balance of respect for each other's roles in Ethan's life. She was more mindful of my requests, and I, in turn, made an effort to appreciate her experience and perspective as a grandmother. Jack noticed the change too. He was relieved to see his mother and me finding a middle ground, and our relationship, which had been strained by the situation, began to heal. We had more open discussions about parenting and the roles of our extended family, conversations that brought us closer and strengthened our partnership. The most significant change, however, was within myself. The journey through the conflicts with Mrs. Harper had been a challenging one, but it had also been transformative. I found a new sense of confidence in my role as a mother, a deeper understanding of the importance of setting boundaries, and the courage to stand up for what I believed was best for Ethan. As spring turned into summer, our family settled into a new rhythm, one that embraced both tradition and change. Mrs. Harper became a supportive presence in Ethan's life, respecting the boundaries we had established. And I found a new respect for her, not just as Jack's mother or Ethan's grandmother, but as a woman with her own set of experiences and wisdom. Our story didn't have a dramatic conclusion, no definitive moment of triumph or defeat. Instead, it was a gradual journey towards mutual respect and understanding, a journey that taught us the value of empathy, communication, and compromise. As I watched Ethan grow, surrounded by love and care from all sides, I realized that our family's strength didn't lie in always agreeing with each other, but in our ability to navigate our differences with respect and love. And in that realization, I found not just peace, but a profound sense of gratitude for the family we were building together, with all its complexities and imperfections. It's been 3 months since the accident, and the reality of losing my mom and grandparents still grips me with an unforgiving coldness. I'm left with a vast fortune, an inheritance that feels more like a chain than a gift. Sitting in the living room, the phone call with my dad replays in my mind. His voice, usually so confident, had an edge of desperation this time. "Ava, you need to think about your step-siblings," he had said. I remember my terse reply, "Why should I? They're struggling. After I lost my job, things have been tough. You have enough to share." His words had sparked a fury in me. "Dad, they are not my family. This money is from Mom and Grandpa. They meant it for me, not for your new family." "But Ava, they need this. It could change their lives." His plea made my heart race with anger. "So could have your loyalty to our family, Dad. You made your choices. Now I'm making mine." He tried to argue, but I cut him off. "No, Dad, I've made up my mind." Hanging up, I felt a mix of triumph and guilt. I knew my decision would deepen the rift between us, but the thought of sharing my inheritance with the children of the woman who tore our family apart was unimaginable. My friends have suggested compromise, giving them a small part to ease their burden. But to me, it's not about the money. It's about principle, about the scars left by betrayal. This inheritance is a reminder of everything I lost. A family torn apart, a childhood marred by divorce and deceit. Sharing it would feel like invalidating all that pain, like saying it was all for nothing. As I sit alone, the house feels emptier than ever. This decision might isolate me further, but it's a stand I need to take, for Mom, for Grandpa, and for the family we once were. I brace myself for the fallout. There will be angry calls, harsh words, maybe even legal threats, but I'm ready. This is more than just money. It's about preserving the last vestiges of a family that once was, and a stand against those who shattered it. The following days were a blur of cold silences and heated conversations. My phone became a battleground, with messages and calls flooding in from Dad and his wife. They were relentless, painting me as the villain in a narrative I refused to accept. One evening, as I was trying to focus on a book, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Dad. With a deep breath, I answered. "Iva, we need to talk about this reasonably." Dad's voice came through, a hint of frustration lacing his words. "There's nothing to discuss, Dad. I've made my decision," I replied, my tone firm. "This isn't just about you, Ava. It's about family, about doing what's right," he countered. "They're not my family." "You made sure of that," I shot back, the bitterness in my voice surprising even me. There was a pause, heavy and charged. "I know I made mistakes, but don't let that punish your step-siblings. They've done nothing wrong." I felt a twinge of guilt but pushed it away. It's not about punishing them. It's about honoring the wishes of Mom and Grandpa. They left this to me, not to them. Ava, please. Think about it. Just a small portion could. No, Dad, I won't be guilted into this. I'm sorry. I hung up before he could reply. The days that followed were a test of my resolve. Dad's wife, whom I never had much of a relationship with, sent me messages pleading for financial help. She painted a grim picture of their life, of struggles and hardships, but her words fell on deaf ears. I couldn't forget how her affair with Dad had shattered our family. My friends were divided on the issue. Some understood my stance, while others suggested I relent to give a small part of the inheritance to ease their burden. You'll still have more than enough, they reasoned. But every time I thought about relenting, I remembered the cold Christmas dinners, the forced conversations, the way Dad's new family seemed like a replacement for the one he had left behind. No, this was more than just money. It was a stand for what I believed in. As the pressure mounted, I found myself withdrawing, spending more time alone, trying to find peace in the solitude. The mansion, once filled with laughter and love, now echoed with the ghosts of a past I couldn't return to. My decision had set me on a path that I knew would lead to more loneliness. But it was a path I had chosen. The rift with my father and his family was deepening, but I was determined to stay true to my convictions, no matter the cost. The weight of my decision began to press down on me as the days turned into weeks. The coldness from my father's side of the family was expected, but the isolation I felt was more profound than I had anticipated. It wasn't just them. Even among my friends, I sensed a shift. Whispers of being too harsh, too unforgiving, started to reach my ears. One afternoon, as I was trying to immerse myself in my studies, my best friend Emily called. Her voice was gentle, but her words carried a weight. Ava, are you sure about this? I mean, completely sure? Emily asked. Her question wasn't just casual curiosity. It was laden with concern. I sighed, feeling the familiar surge of frustration. Yes, I'm sure. Why does everyone keep questioning my decision? Because it's a big one, Ava, and it's not just affecting you. It's affecting your relationship with your dad and his family, she said softly. I frowned, feeling the sting of her words. They were never really family to me, Em. You know what happened. Why is everyone acting like I'm the one who did something wrong? It's not about right or wrong, Ava. It's about what this is doing to you. You're isolating yourself, and it's worrying. Her words were like a mirror, reflecting a truth I had been avoiding. The mansion felt more like a prison than a home, a place filled with the memories of a family that no longer existed. The silence was suffocating, and the loneliness was a constant companion. I changed the subject, not wanting to delve deeper into my feelings. But after the call, her words lingered in my mind. Was I letting my resentment and hurt dictate my actions? Was this stand worth the cost of my peace? The following week, my father's wife reached out again. This time, her message was more desperate, almost begging. Ava, please reconsider. The kids are struggling. They don't have the same opportunities you had. Her words were a painful reminder of the disparity between our lives, but they also ignited a spark of defiance in me. Why should I be responsible for the consequences of their parents' choices? My mom and grandparents had worked hard for this legacy. It wasn't meant to be a remedy for my father's mistakes. As I lay in bed that night, the mansion around me felt larger and colder than ever. The walls seemed to whisper with echoes of the past, of times when happiness wasn't a distant memory. I realized that this inheritance, this vast wealth, had become a barrier, isolating me from the rest of the world. I was standing at a crossroads, torn between my principles and the growing realization that this battle was consuming me. The question haunted me. Was holding on to this legacy worth the cost of my own happiness and peace of mind? The internal struggle between my principles and the growing isolation became a constant companion in the ensuing days. Each morning, as I woke up in the vast, empty mansion, the weight of my decision and its consequences felt heavier. One particularly gloomy afternoon, I decided to visit Mrs. Jenkins, an old family friend and my mother's confidant. Her quaint cottage, filled with the aroma of freshly baked cookies, was a stark contrast to the cold grandeur of my home. Sitting at her kitchen table sipping tea, I opened up about my turmoil. Mrs. Jenkins listened quietly, her wise eyes reflecting understanding and empathy. "Ava, dear," she finally spoke, "holding on to anger and resentment is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned." Her words struck a chord in me. Was I holding on to this inheritance out of respect for my family's legacy, or was it becoming a tool for my resentment? "But Mrs. Jenkins, it's about principle. My mom and grandparents wouldn't have wanted their hard-earned legacy to go to them," I argued, though a part of me doubted my own words. She nodded. "Principles are important, but so is compassion and peace of mind. Sometimes we must choose battles worth fighting for, and let go of the ones that only bring us pain." Her words lingered with me as I left. The battle I was fighting, was it truly about honoring my family's legacy, or was it a manifestation of the unresolved anger and hurt from my father's betrayal? That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with a turmoil of emotions. Part of me clung to the idea of legacy and loyalty, while another part yearned for closure and peace. The following days were a period of introspection. I spent hours walking through the gardens, reflecting on my childhood, the happy memories before the divorce, and the painful ones that followed. I remembered my mom's strength, her dignity in the face of betrayal, and her undying love for me. As I sat by the old oak tree where I used to play as a child, a realization dawned on me. This inheritance was not just a sum of wealth, it was a test of my character. Was I going to let it fuel my bitterness? Or was I going to use it to forge a new path, one that would honor the memory of my loved ones in a way that brought peace, not just to me, but perhaps even to those estranged parts of my so-called family? With this new perspective, the decision I had to make began to take a different shape. It was no longer just about money. It was about what kind of person I wanted to be and the legacy I wanted to leave behind. As the days turned into weeks, the weight of my decision and my newfound perspective began to reshape my thoughts. I found myself torn between the desire to uphold my family's legacy and the understanding that clinging to bitterness would only prolong my pain. One evening, while going through old photo albums, I stumbled upon pictures of happier times before the divorce, before everything changed. Seeing my younger self smiling, carefree, surrounded by a loving family, stirred something within me. It was a stark reminder of how much had changed and what I had lost. The phone rang, breaking the silence. It was Dad. I hesitated but answered, my heart pounding in my chest. "Ava, I know we've had our differences, but I need to talk to you about something important." Dad's voice was somber. I listened, a mix of curiosity and apprehension taking hold. "It's about your step-siblings," he began. "They're really struggling. Your stepbrother, he's been working 2 jobs just to save for college. It's taking a toll on him." His words hit a nerve. Despite my feelings towards them, the thought of anyone having to struggle so hard at such a young age was unsettling. "Dad, I don't know what to say," I replied, my voice faltering. "Ava, I'm not asking you to forgive me or forget what happened, but they are innocent in all of this. A little help could go a long way for them," he urged. After we hung up, his words echoed in my mind. I was conflicted. My initial decision was driven by a sense of loyalty to my mom and grandparents. But now, hearing about my stepbrother's struggles, I couldn't help but feel a pang of empathy. The following day, I decided to seek advice from a trusted mentor, my university professor, Dr. Ellis. He had always provided me with wise counsel and a different perspective on things. "Ava, it's commendable that you want to honor your family's legacy," Dr. Ellis said after listening to my story. "But sometimes the best way to honor someone's memory is by spreading kindness and generosity, especially to those who might not expect it from us." His words were a gentle nudge, steering me towards a decision I never thought I'd consider. Was I ready to let go of the past hurts and extend a helping hand to those who were, in a way, a part of my extended family? That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about my mom and grandparents. What would they have done in my place? Would they have held on to the past, or would they have chosen a path of compassion and forgiveness? The decision I was about to make felt like stepping into unknown territory. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about breaking free from the chains of resentment and hurt. It was about choosing a path that could potentially bring healing, not just to me, but also to those whose lives were inadvertently intertwined with mine. The decision to potentially alter the course of my step-siblings' lives weighed heavily on me. However, as I mulled over the conversations with my father, Mrs. Jenkins, and Dr. Ellis, a clarity began to emerge. This was not just about giving away money. It was about breaking a cycle of resentment and animosity that had plagued our families for years. One crisp morning, I made my way to the attorney's office, the custodian of my family's estate. Mr. Thompson, a stern yet kind man in his 60s, greeted me with a knowing look. "Ava, I've been expecting you. Your father has been quite persistent in contacting me about your decision," he said, adjusting his glasses. Sitting across from him, I took a deep breath. "Mr. Thompson, I've decided to set up a trust fund for my step-siblings' education. However, it's important that this is done anonymously. They should not know that the help is coming from me." Mr. Thompson raised his eyebrows, a hint of surprise in his eyes. "That's a very noble decision, Ava. But are you sure? This goes against your earlier stance." I nodded, feeling a sense of peace with my decision. "Yes, I'm sure. This is the right thing to do. It's what my mom and grandparents would have wanted, to help others, but without expecting anything in return." The legal formalities were sorted with precision and discretion. As I left the office, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had found a way to honor my family's legacy while also extending an olive branch to a part of my life I had long resented. The news of their sudden financial assistance reached me through a phone call from my dad a few weeks later. He was overjoyed, though clueless about my involvement. His voice, filled with relief and happiness, was something I hadn't heard in a long time. "Ava, you won't believe it. An anonymous donor has set up a trust fund for the kids' education. It's a miracle," he exclaimed. I smiled, a sense of satisfaction filling me. "That's wonderful news, Dad. I'm happy for them," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. The decision to help my step-siblings anonymously did more for me than I had anticipated. It allowed me to let go of the bitterness that had clouded my heart and to make peace with a part of my past that I had struggled with. Standing by my decision also meant standing by my values, doing what I felt was right, but on my own terms. It was a testament to the strength and resilience I had inherited from my mother and grandparents. In that moment, I realized that the true legacy they had left me was not just wealth, but the ability to make choices that could bring about positive change, even in the most complex situations. As I moved forward, I found a new sense of purpose and direction. The mansion, once a symbol of isolation and loneliness, began to feel like a home again, filled with possibilities and a future that I was ready to embrace. The months following my decision to help my step-siblings, albeit anonymously, brought a subtle yet profound change in my life. The mansion, which had once echoed with the loneliness of my struggles, started to feel different. It was as if the walls, once witnesses to my family's unraveling, were now basking in the light of a newfound peace. I began to invest more time in my passions and interests. The vast gardens of the estate, which had been meticulously maintained, became my sanctuary. I found solace in tending to the roses my mother loved, feeling closer to her with each bloom that flourished under my care. My focus on academics intensified as well. I enrolled in a master's program, driven by a desire to not just further my education, but to make a meaningful impact in the world. The inheritance, once a burden, now felt like a tool to carve a path that was truly my own. In this newfound tranquility, I also discovered the courage to rebuild bridges. I reached out to my father, initiating conversations that were no longer laced with resentment or bitterness. Our relationship, while still tentative, began to heal. The bitterness that had once defined our interactions gave way to cautious optimism. One brisk autumn day, I invited Dad over for lunch. It was the first time he had been to the mansion since the inheritance was settled. We sat in the dining room, where the air was filled with the aroma of roasted chicken, and the chatter was tentative but genuine. "Ava, I want to apologize for how I handled everything," Dad said, his eyes not quite meeting mine. I looked at him, seeing not just the man who had hurt me, but also the father who was trying to make amends. "I understand, Dad. We both made mistakes. Let's just try to move forward, okay?" He nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I'm proud of you, Ava. You've grown into an incredible woman. Your mother would have been so proud." Hearing those words, something inside me healed a little more. It wasn't just about forgiveness, it was about understanding and moving on from the past. As winter approached, the mansion became a hub of activity. I started hosting small gatherings, inviting friends and even some distant relatives. The house, once a symbol of my isolation, became a place of warmth and laughter. In those moments, I realized the true essence of the inheritance I had received. It wasn't just the wealth or the estate, it was the resilience, the compassion, and the strength to make difficult decisions. My family's legacy wasn't just in the tangible assets they left behind, it was in the lessons they taught me, the love they gave me, and the courage they instilled in me to forge my own path. As I stood by the window one evening, looking out at the sprawling grounds blanketed in snow, I felt a deep sense of contentment. I had not only preserved my family's legacy, but had also started writing my own story, one of healing, growth, and hope. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but I was ready to face it with a heart that was now open to the endless possibilities that life had to offer. The new year always brought a sense of fresh beginnings, but this time it arrived with an unsettling surprise. My doorbell rang, piercing the quiet of my small, cozy home. Expecting maybe a neighbor or a late courier, I casually swung the door open. My heart plummeted into my stomach. There, on my doorstep, stood two figures from my past I never wished to see again, my sister Claire and my ex-husband Ethan. Claire, with her ever-present smug smile, looked almost triumphant standing next to Ethan. Ethan's presence was like a reopened wound, his expression a mix of arrogance and false pity. 3 years had passed since I last saw them, and here they were, as if they'd never shattered my world. "Why are you here?" My voice was a shaky whisper, betraying my shock. Claire's laughter was like nails on a chalkboard. "Oh, look, Ethan, she's speechless. What's wrong, Anna? Not happy to see your dear sister and loving ex-husband?" Ethan leaned against the doorframe, his gaze scanning the room behind me. "Yeah, Anna, we just thought we'd pay a visit, see how the old place is holding up without us." I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to slam the door in their faces. "This is no longer your place, Ethan, and you, Claire, have no business here either." Their smirks only widened at my attempt to stand ground. Ethan's next words were like a slap. "You know, Anna, I really regret ever tying myself to you. What a waste of my best years." Claire chimed in, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. Poor Anna, always the underachiever, even in marriage. Their cruel words stung, but before I could muster a response, a voice from behind startled us all. "Who's at the door, Anna?" It was my father, George, whom I wasn't expecting until later that evening. His unexpected presence threw Claire and Ethan off balance. The smirks faded from their faces as they awkwardly shifted their stance. "Dad, you're back early," I managed to say, my voice laced with relief. George's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene before him. "Claire? Ethan? What in the world are you two doing here?" Their composure crumbled, the confident facade melting away under my father's stern gaze. For a moment there was silence, a tense air hanging between us. It was broken only by Claire's hesitant voice. We just wanted to wish Anna a happy new year." George's disbelief was palpable. "Really? After years of silence, you suddenly remember family ties on New Year's Day?" His tone was icy, hinting at unspoken anger and disappointment. Ethan cleared his throat, attempting to regain his composure. "Well, we also had some news to share, but maybe this isn't the right time." I knew there was more to their visit than just New Year's greetings. Their unexpected arrival, the smug looks, the veiled insults, it was all too familiar. The same old pattern of deceit and manipulation. But this time, I wasn't the same person they had left behind. As they awkwardly excused themselves, promising to return another time, I closed the door with a mixture of relief and dread. Their return could mean only one thing. Trouble was brewing once again. And this time, I had to be ready. After Claire and Ethan left, the house felt oppressively silent. My father, George, sat across from me, his brow furrowed in concern. "Anna, what was that all about? Why are they back?" I sighed, feeling the weight of years of suppressed memories. "I don't know, Dad, but with Claire and Ethan, it's never without a reason." George nodded, his expression darkening. "I remember how things ended, how they betrayed you. You don't owe them anything, Anna." I appreciated his support, but there was a part of the story that even he didn't fully understand, the depth of Claire's manipulation and deceit. It went back to our childhood, a time that should have been filled with innocent memories but was instead marked by Claire's selfishness. "Dad, do you remember my 10th birthday? The porcelain doll Grandma gave me?" I asked, my voice tinged with sadness. George's face softened. "Of course, you loved that doll." I nodded, the memory vivid in my mind. "Claire broke it on purpose, but she cried and told Mom it was an accident, that I was the one who knocked it over." George looked surprised. "I never knew that. Your mother always said it was an accident." "That was just the beginning," I continued, the old wounds reopening. "She always played the innocent, and I was the one who got blamed. She knew exactly how to manipulate everyone around her." I could see the regret in George's eyes, the realization of what he hadn't seen all those years. "I'm sorry, Anna. I should have seen through it. It's not your fault, Dad. We were all fooled by Claire's act." I paused, taking a deep breath. Even with Ethan, she played us both. They deserve each other. George reached across, taking my hand in a firm, comforting grip. "What matters is that you're free from their toxicity now. Don't let them drag you back into their drama." I nodded, trying to muster a smile. The conversation with my father made it clear that the past wasn't as buried as I had hoped. Claire and Ethan's return wasn't just a simple visit. It was a harbinger of more turmoil to come. That night, sleep eluded me. The memories of Claire's manipulations, the way she had always outshone me in our parents' eyes, the way she'd effortlessly charmed Ethan away from me. It all swirled in my mind. Her return meant she was up to something, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread about what was to come. But amidst the turmoil of thoughts, a determined resolve began to form. I wouldn't be the passive victim this time. I would stand up to Claire and Ethan, whatever their game was. This time, I was ready to fight back. In the days following Claire and Ethan's visit, their words and smirks haunted me. I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself, but the past refused to stay buried. The memory of my marriage to Ethan, once filled with love and promise, now felt like a thorny path I had been forced to tread barefoot. It started beautifully. Ethan was charming, attentive, and everything I thought I wanted in a partner. We were happy, or so I believed. But then came the subtle changes, the late nights, the unexplained absences, the evasive answers. I trusted him, ignoring the nagging doubts and the whispers of intuition. Then, one evening, the veil lifted. I returned home early from a business trip, the anticipation of surprising Ethan tingling in my heart. But the surprise was mine. I found Ethan and Claire together, their laughter echoing in our living room, a scene that shattered my world. The confrontation that followed was a blur of tears, accusations, and bitter truths. Claire, with her characteristic lack of remorse, simply shrugged, her words slicing through me. "You were always too busy with your little job, Anna. Ethan needed someone, and I was there. It's not our fault you couldn't keep your husband's interest." Ethan's justification was equally cold. "I thought I loved you, Anna, but Claire, she's different, exciting. You and I were never right for each other." Their betrayal was a double-edged sword, cutting deep into my heart and my trust. The divorce that followed was quick, Ethan and Claire making no secret of their relationship. I was left to pick up the pieces of my broken life, feeling foolish and betrayed. Now, as I sat in my office, the memories gnawing at my mind, anger bubbled inside me. How dare they waltz back into my life after what they did? How dare they think they could just disrupt my peace again? But it was more than anger. It was a burning desire for retribution. I wanted them to feel a fraction of the pain they had caused me. The idea of revenge, once foreign and distasteful, now seemed like the only way to close this painful chapter of my life. I made a decision I would confront them, demand answers. But this time I wouldn't be the blindsided, heartbroken wife. I would be strong, unyielding. They had underestimated me once. They wouldn't make the same mistake again. I picked up my phone and dialed Ethan's number. My voice was steady, my resolve firm. "Ethan, we need to talk. Meet me at the cafe on 5th Street. Tomorrow, noon." His surprised stammer was a small victory, but it was enough. "Sure, Anna, tomorrow then." The call ended, and for the first time in days I felt a sense of control. The game had begun, and this time I was playing to win. The cafe was bustling with the midday crowd when I arrived. I spotted Ethan seated at a corner table, his posture tense. As I approached, his attempt at a casual smile didn't reach his eyes. "Anna, thanks for coming. I wasn't sure you'd want to see me, he started, his voice laced with feigned concern. I don't, I replied sharply, taking a seat across from him. But I need answers. Why are you and Claire back in my life? Ethan shifted uncomfortably. Look, Anna, things haven't been great for us. After we left, we had some tough times. I felt a bitter satisfaction seeing him uneasy. Tough times? You expect sympathy from me? No, of course not, he stammered. It's just that Claire is pregnant. We thought it's time to mend fences, for the sake of family. His words hit me like a cold wave. Claire, pregnant? A part of me felt a pang of hurt, but it was quickly overshadowed by skepticism. And you think I would? What? Welcome you with open arms? I asked, my voice laced with disbelief. It's not just that, Ethan said, avoiding my gaze. There's the matter of the inheritance, your father's estate. So there it was, the true reason behind their sudden reappearance. It wasn't guilt or a desire for reconciliation. It was greed. You have some nerve, Ethan. You cheat, you leave, and now you come back for money? I felt my anger rising, my voice growing louder despite the public setting. People can change, Anna. We've been through a lot. We just want a chance to start over, to be a family, he pleaded. A family built on lies and deceit, I retorted, my heart racing with anger. Just then my phone vibrated. It was a message from Claire. We need to talk. Alone, my place, tonight. I looked up at Ethan, my decision made. Tell Claire I'll see her tonight. But make no mistake, Ethan, this isn't a family reunion. This is me settling the score. Ethan's face fell, a mixture of surprise and concern etching his features. As I stood up to leave, I felt a strange sense of empowerment. For too long, I had been the victim of their selfish actions. But now the tables were turning. I walked out of the cafe, leaving Ethan behind, my mind racing with possibilities. Tonight's meeting with Claire would be more than just a confrontation. It would be the beginning of my revenge, a chance to reclaim my dignity, and make them regret ever crossing me. After leaving Ethan at the cafe, a mix of emotions swirled within me. Anger, betrayal, but above all, a newfound determination. As I drove home, my mind raced with plans for the evening's confrontation with Claire. I needed to be prepared, to stand my ground against her manipulative tactics. As the evening approached, I stood in front of my mirror, steeling myself. The reflection showed a woman changed by adversity, no longer the naive girl who once fell for Ethan's charm or got overshadowed by Claire's deceit. Tonight I was facing my past, ready to confront and overcome it. Claire's house was a stark contrast to mine, lavish, ostentatious, a testament to her and Ethan's superficial values. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. The door swung open and there she stood, Claire as poised and arrogant as ever. Anna, come in. I'm glad you could make it. Her tone was condescending, as if she was doing me a favor by allowing me into her home. I stepped inside, my eyes scanning the extravagant decor. So, Claire, why am I here? What do you want from me? I asked, cutting to the chase. Claire led me to the living room, her movements graceful yet calculated. I wanted to talk to you, sister to sister. It's been too long, and with the baby coming, I thought it's time we bury the hatchet. I almost laughed at her audacity. Bury the hatchet? After you stole my husband and now come back for my father's inheritance? Claire's expression hardened for a moment before she regained her composure. Anna, let's be practical. Ethan and I need financial stability for our child. Your father's estate can help with that. Her blatant greed was repulsive. You expect me to just hand over what's rightfully mine, after everything you've done? It's not just about the money, Anna, Claire said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. It's about family. We're still sisters, after all. I stared at her, incredulous. You lost the right to call me sister the moment you betrayed me. There was a silence, a tension that hung heavily between us. Then Claire's facade cracked, her true nature surfacing. Fine, if you're going to be selfish about it, then let's talk legalities. You know Dad's will favors the first grandchild. My baby will ensure Ethan and I get the inheritance. Her words hit me like a physical blow. This was her game, to use her pregnancy as leverage, to manipulate our father's will in her favor. You're unbelievable, Claire. You think you can just manipulate everyone and everything to your liking, but not this time. I won't let you. My voice was firm, unyielding. Claire smirked, a cold, calculating look in her eyes. We'll see, Anna. We'll see how long you can keep up this righteous act. I turned to leave, my mind reeling from Claire's callousness. As I drove away from her house, a plan began to form in my mind. Claire and Ethan were playing a dangerous game, but now I knew the rules. It was time for them to learn that I was no longer the passive player in their twisted game. The days following my encounter with Claire were spent in a state of heightened alertness, preparing for the inevitable legal battle over my father's estate. I sought legal counsel, determined to protect what was rightfully mine and my father's legacy from Claire and Ethan's greedy clutches. As I delved deeper into the legal intricacies, a piece of shocking news reached me. Ethan's business, the one he had started with such bravado, had collapsed. They were drowning in debt, their lavish lifestyle unsustainable. This revelation shed new light on their sudden reappearance and desperation for the inheritance. I met with my lawyer, a sharp-witted woman named Miss Harper, to discuss our strategy. They're cornered financially and legally, she said, scanning the documents. Your sister's claim about the will favoring the first grandchild doesn't stand on solid legal ground. We can fight this. Her confidence was reassuring, but I knew Claire and Ethan wouldn't give up easily. They were like cornered animals, unpredictable and dangerous. My resolve was tested sooner than expected. One evening, as I returned home from work, I found Claire waiting on my doorstep, her expression a mix of defiance and desperation. "Anna, we need to talk," she said, her voice uncharacteristically shaky. I eyed her warily. "I have nothing to say to you, Claire. This matter is now in the hands of lawyers." She stepped forward, blocking my path. "Please, Anna, I'm not pregnant. It was a lie, a stupid plan Ethan and I concocted to sway Dad's will in our favor." Her confession, though shocking, didn't surprise me. It was just another deceit in their long list of manipulations. "So, all this time you've been lying. What now, Claire? Ready to admit defeat?" I asked, my voice cold. Claire's eyes welled up with tears, but they didn't move me. "I don't know what to do. Ethan's business is ruined. We're losing everything. I need your help, Anna." Her plea for help after all the pain she had caused was almost laughable. "You want my help? After everything you've done? You really are delusional." She grabbed my arm, desperation in her grasp. "Please, Anna, I'm your sister. Remember how we used to be before all this?" I pulled away, her touch repulsive to me. "The sister I knew died the moment you betrayed me. You made your choice, Claire. Now live with it." Leaving Claire standing alone, I entered my house, closing the door on her and our shared past. The sense of finality was liberating. I was no longer bound by the chains of our toxic relationship. That night, as I sat alone in the quiet of my living room, I realized that this was more than just a battle for inheritance. It was a fight for my own liberation, a chance to finally close the chapter on Claire and Ethan's treachery and move on with my life. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and tense negotiations. Claire and Ethan's desperation became more evident as their financial woes escalated. Despite this, I remained steadfast, bolstered by Miss Harper's expertise and my own newfound strength. Then came the day of the decisive court hearing. The courtroom was cold and sterile, a stark contrast to the heated emotions simmering beneath the surface. Ethan and Claire sat together, a facade of unity, but the strain was evident in their haggard appearances. As the proceedings began, Miss Harper was methodical and precise, dismantling each of Claire and Ethan's arguments with legal acumen. Claire's lie about her pregnancy was exposed, further weakening their position. I watched Claire as the reality of her situation dawned on her. The confident, manipulative sister I once knew was gone, replaced by a shell of her former self, consumed by the consequences of her actions. During a recess, Claire approached me, a plea in her eyes. "Anna, please. I know I don't deserve your mercy, but we're ruined. We have nothing." Her words, once capable of swaying me, now fell on deaf ears. "You brought this on yourselves, Claire. You chose greed and deceit. Now you must face the results." The final judgment was a resounding victory for me. The judge ruled in my favor, ensuring that the inheritance remained rightfully mine. Claire and Ethan left the courtroom defeated, their schemes reduced to ashes. But as I walked out, a sense of closure filled me. This wasn't just a legal victory. It was a personal triumph over the ghosts of my past. Claire and Ethan's downfall was the karmic justice they deserved. But for me, it was a liberation from the chains of betrayal and hurt. In the days that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life, free from the shadows of Claire and Ethan. The wound they left would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I had emerged stronger, more resilient, and with a clearer understanding of who I was and what I stood for. And so, as I sat in my garden one evening, watching the sunset, I realized that true victory wasn't in revenge or the suffering of those who wronged me. It was in the peace and strength I found within myself, the ability to move forward, and the promise of new beginnings. As his mother's icy words pierced the Christmas air, "Blood is thicker than water, dear. You'll understand one day," I realized this wasn't just coldness, it was cruelty. But the day she sneered, "Planning to go to college? How ambitious for someone like you," I knew it was war. I remember the first time I saw him just as clearly as I remember the first time I met her, his mother. We were both 13, awkward in our own ways, but there was something about him that drew me in. It wasn't just a teenage crush, it felt like something more, something deeper. And as our relationship grew, so did my encounters with his family, particularly with his mother. My initial interactions with her were cordial, albeit somewhat cold. I was young, naive, and eager to be accepted. I remember how she would subtly direct me out of family photos during Christmas, saying things like, "Oh dear, this is just for immediate family. Maybe you could help with setting the table." I didn't think much of it at first. I thought maybe this was just how families were, having grown up in a less formal environment myself. But as time went on, these small acts of exclusion became more frequent. I would be gently ushered away under some pretense or another when it came to family games or discussions. "Why don't you take a break, dear? We're just having a little family catch-up," she would say, her tone polite yet firm. At first, I thought I was being overly sensitive, reading too much into harmless comments. But the pattern was undeniable. It wasn't just about being left out of pictures or games. It was the way she would talk about their family, her family, emphasizing the word as if to remind me that I was not a part of it. Her remarks were never overtly hostile, always wrapped in a veneer of politeness. Yet, the message was clear. I was an outsider. I tried to talk to my boyfriend about it, but he always brushed it off. "That's just how she is," he would say. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to her behavior. It was as if she saw me as a threat, an unwelcome intruder in her carefully curated family life. What made it all the more confusing was her reputation within the family. She had fought with nearly every relative on her husband's side, cutting ties and burning bridges with a startling ease. I often wondered what had caused such rifts, what words had been said to create such chasms. But I never dared to ask. It was a strange situation to be in, feeling both a part of something special with my boyfriend and yet so distinctly apart from a key aspect of his life. As we grew older, our relationship strengthening with each passing year, the divide between me and his family, or rather his mother, only seemed to widen. But I held on to the hope that one day things would change, that I would be seen as more than just an outsider looking in. The chill of the winter air was nothing compared to the coldness I felt in her living room. Christmas was around the corner, and the house was draped in festive lights, the tree twinkling in the corner. Yet, the warmth of the season seemed to bypass her heart. "You know, dear, it's always nice to see young love. But remember, things change," she said one evening, her voice laced with a deceptive sweetness as she handed me a cup of hot cocoa. The words hung in the air, a veiled warning wrapped in a grandmotherly tone. I remember looking over at my boyfriend, seeking reassurance. But he was engrossed in conversation with his father, laughing at some joke. I felt a pang of isolation, a silent scream in a room full of voices. "Change can be good," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "It brings new opportunities." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Indeed it does. But family always remains. Blood is thicker than water, after all." The way she stressed family made my stomach knot. It was a barrier, a line drawn in the sand that I couldn't cross. Days turned into months, and every family gathering felt like navigating a minefield. The subtle jabs continued, each one a reminder of my outsider's status. "Would you mind helping with the dishes, dear? We're just going to have some family time," she'd say, her words a velvet knife. I would retreat to the kitchen, the sound of their laughter a distant echo, and I'd wonder what I was doing wrong. Why couldn't I be a part of that laughter? Was it so hard for her to accept me? My boyfriend's obliviousness to the situation only added to the weight of my solitude. I loved him, but in moments like these, I felt miles apart from him. It was as if he lived in a different reality, one where his mother's barbs were just harmless comments. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, she turned to me with a calculated casualness. "So have you thought about what you'll do after high school? It's important to have a plan, especially when you're, well, not from a well-off family." I felt my cheeks burn, the sting of her words sharper than any physical blow. "I have," I replied, trying to mask my hurt. "I'm planning to go to college. I want to study psychology." "Psychology?" She raised an eyebrow. Interesting choice for someone who struggles to understand basic family dynamics. My fork clattered against my plate. I looked up, meeting her gaze. There was no mistaking the message now. She didn't see me as worthy, not of her family, and certainly not of her son. It was in that moment, under the harsh glare of the dining room light, that I realized this was more than just a series of misunderstandings. This was a deliberate campaign to undermine me, to make me feel small and unwelcome. And for the first time, I began to question whether I could ever truly be a part of the family I so desperately wanted to belong to. The tension in the air was palpable as the holiday season approached. Christmas, a time for joy and family, had become a battleground of unspoken words and hidden resentments. My boyfriend and I were caught in a delicate balancing act, trying to divide our time between my family and his. But this year, the scales tipped dangerously. "I think we should spend Christmas morning with my family and then the afternoon and evening with yours," my boyfriend suggested, his voice hesitant, as if walking on thin ice. I nodded, appreciating his attempt at fairness, but dreading the inevitable reaction from his mother. Sounds like a plan, but let's brace ourselves for the storm. The storm came, as expected, but not in the form I anticipated. It was a cold front from his mother, a series of messages oscillating between guilt-tripping and outright anger. She couldn't fathom why we would choose to spend more time with my family, implying a lack of loyalty on our part. In an attempt to smooth things over, I sent her a text, explaining our decision and expressing my desire to still celebrate with them. "We really want to spend a full day celebrating Christmas with you, playing cards and enjoying the lights," I wrote, hoping to bridge the gap. Her response was a thunderclap. "So, now you dictate how my son spends his holidays? You're pulling him away from us. You've always been manipulative, even as a teenager." I stared at the phone, my heart sinking. Words like manipulative and narcissist were thrown around, painting me as some villain in their family story. I was overseas at the time, hoping for a respite, but the conflict followed me like a shadow. My boyfriend stood by me, his own disbelief and anger growing with each accusatory message from his parents. They came to our house, uninvited, a confrontation that ended with him defending me and our relationship and demanding they leave. "I can't believe they called you abusive and narcissistic," he said later, his voice a mix of anger and confusion. "They've crossed a line, and I don't know if we can come back from this." His words echoed in my mind as I returned home, hoping for some resolution. But the divide had only deepened. They called him, backpedaling on their accusations, but the damage was done. They nitpicked my every action, every word, turning mundane gestures into evidence of my supposed manipulative nature. As I listened to their baseless claims, a realization dawned on me. This wasn't just about Christmas or family time. This was a concerted effort to undermine me, to paint me as the villain in their son's life. And as the accusations piled up, so did my resolve. My boyfriend and I made a decision, one that was heartbreaking but necessary. We decided they would not be invited to our wedding. It was a line drawn in the sand, a stand against the relentless tide of their unwarranted hostility. But even as we made this decision, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of loss. A part of me had always hoped for reconciliation, for a family united. But as the snow fell softly outside, blanketing the world in white, I realized some divides were too wide to bridge, and perhaps some ties were meant to be broken. The flight back home felt longer than usual, each mile stretching out endlessly. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, replaying the recent events that had turned our lives upside down. I had hoped my trip overseas would offer a break from the tension, but instead, it felt like I was returning to a battlefield. When I walked into our house, the familiar walls seemed to echo with the remnants of the argument that had taken place in my absence. My boyfriend greeted me with a tight hug, a silent acknowledgement of the storm we were weathering together. He recounted the details of his parents' unexpected visit, how they had come with accusations and left with anger. His voice trembled with a mixture of fury and disbelief. "They said you were controlling me, that our relationship is abusive. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had to ask them to leave. I couldn't stand hearing them talk about you like that." I sat there, numb, trying to process his words. It was one thing to be on the receiving end of passive-aggressive comments, but to be accused of being an abuser was something entirely different. It felt surreal, like a twisted narrative from a different life. In the days that followed, our home became a refuge and a prison. We were safe from their accusations, but we couldn't escape the reality of the situation. The rift between my boyfriend and his parents had grown into a chasm, and I couldn't help but feel responsible. We spent evenings talking, sometimes in circles, about what to do next. "Maybe we should just elope," he suggested one night, half joking, half serious. "At least then we wouldn't have to worry about who to invite." I laughed, but the idea lingered in my mind, a tempting escape from the drama. Yet deep down, I knew running away wasn't the solution. This wasn't just about a wedding. It was about standing our ground, about not letting their baseless accusations define us. The calls from his parents continued, a mix of backtracking and new accusations. They seemed to be grasping at straws, trying to find any reason to validate their disdain for me. "They said you don't say please or thank you enough," my boyfriend told me, his voice tinged with exasperation. "And now they're claiming you never greet them properly. It's like they're creating a version of you that doesn't even exist." I listened, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. The allegations were so petty, so far from the truth, that it was almost laughable. Almost. But beneath the absurdity was a painful realization. They were trying to erase the person I was, replacing me with a caricature of their own making. As the days turned into weeks, the initial shock of their words gave way to a deep-seated determination. I refused to let their perception of me become my reality. I had spent too long trying to win their approval, to fit into their narrow definition of family, but no more. It was time to define myself, to stand firm in who I was and who I wanted to be. The decision not to invite them to our wedding solidified in my heart. It wasn't just about drawing a line. It was about choosing ourselves, our love, over the toxic dynamics of his family. It was a choice made with a heavy heart, but with a clear vision of the future we wanted to build, one based on respect, understanding, and unconditional love. As the winter turned to spring, I watched the world come back to life, the snow melting away to reveal the resilient earth beneath. And in that renewal, I found a reflection of our own journey, a testament to the strength that comes from facing adversity together. Returning to a semblance of normal life after such turmoil was like trying to piece together a shattered vase. We knew it would never be the same, but we hoped to find some beauty in the imperfection, in the new shape our lives were taking. As I sat across from my boyfriend one evening, the low hum of the city outside our window, I couldn't help but feel the weight of his parents' accusations lingering between us. "Do you think there's any truth to what they said? About me being manipulative?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "No, absolutely not. They don't see the amazing person I see. They don't know you like I do." His words were a balm, but the scars were still tender. I found myself replaying every interaction with his parents, analyzing my words, my actions, searching for any hint of the person they accused me of being. It was exhausting, like chasing shadows in a never-ending maze. Their recent call, an attempt to retract their earlier allegations while still hurling new ones, only added to the confusion. The claims were petty, almost laughable in their triviality, but their impact was profound. They accused me of not saying please or thank you enough, of failing to greet them properly, a litany of manners they claimed I lacked. I found myself laughing one moment and crying the next. How can they even say these things? After everything, they focus on pleasantries, I said, my laughter tinged with disbelief. It's their way of trying to control the narrative, my boyfriend replied, his voice steady but his eyes revealing the turmoil within. They're trying to paint you in a certain light to justify their behavior. The conversation shifted to our upcoming wedding, a topic that once brought joy but now was shadowed by the absence of his parents. Are we doing the right thing? I asked, the doubt creeping in. We are, he affirmed, his grip on my hand tightening. This is about us, our love, our future, not their prejudices. In the weeks that followed, we focused on planning our wedding, a celebration of our journey and the life we were building together. It was a bittersweet process, the joy of planning our special day mixed with the sorrow of his parents' absence. But as the wedding day approached, I found strength in the love that surrounded us. Friends, my family, and most importantly, my partner. Their support was a reminder that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who stand by you, who see you for who you truly are. On the eve of our wedding, as I stood looking out at the city, the lights twinkling like distant stars, I realized that this was a new beginning, a chance to leave behind the hurt and the accusations, to step into a future filled with love and understanding. Our decision to exclude his parents from the wedding wasn't just about drawing a boundary. It was about choosing happiness over toxicity, peace over conflict. It was a declaration that we would not let their narrow-minded views dictate the course of our lives. As I turned away from the window, ready to embrace the future, I knew that the road ahead would have its challenges. But I also knew that together, we were strong enough to face whatever came our way, bound not by the approval of others, but by the love we shared. A love that was our own, unbreakable, and true. On the morning of our wedding, I awoke with a mix of emotions swirling within me. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, yet there was a shadow cast by the absence of his parents. As I sat on the edge of the bed, watching the sunrise paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had led us here. The house was quiet, the calm before the storm of celebration. In this rare moment of solitude, my thoughts drifted to his parents. There was a part of me, a small, hopeful part, that had wished for reconciliation, for a miracle that would mend the broken ties. But as the light of dawn grew stronger, so did my realization that some things were beyond repair. I thought about the accusations, the hurtful words, the relentless attempts to paint me as someone I wasn't. It had been a battle, not just against their perceptions, but against my own doubts. Their words had planted seeds of uncertainty in my mind, making me question my worth, my place in his life. But as I sat there, on the brink of a new chapter, I realized that their words had also given me something invaluable: resilience. I had learned to stand up for myself, to trust in the love and support of those who truly knew me. I had discovered a strength I didn't know I had, forged in the fire of their unwarranted judgment. I stood up, my reflection in the mirror a testament to the journey. Today I was not just a bride. I was a survivor, a warrior who had fought for her place in the world. The day unfolded in a blur of laughter, tears, and endless dancing. Our friends and family surrounded us, their love and joy palpable in every hug, every congratulatory smile. My parents beamed with pride, their eyes shining with unshed tears as they watched us exchange vows. And there he was, my partner, my rock, standing before me with a look of love so deep, so unwavering that it took my breath away. As we said our vows, promising to love and cherish each other in sickness and in health, I knew that we were more than just husband and wife. We were partners in every sense of the word, bound by a love that had weathered the fiercest of storms. As the night drew to a close, we stood together, watching our guests depart. The air was filled with the echoes of laughter and music, the remnants of a day filled with love and celebration. "We did it," he whispered, his arms wrapped around me. "We really did it." "Yes, we did," I replied, my heart full, "and we'll keep doing it every day for the rest of our lives." We stood there, in each other's embrace, looking out at the starlit sky. It was a moment of peace, of contentment, a quiet end to a day that marked the beginning of our forever. As I lay in bed that night, his arms around me, I realized that this was what true love felt like. It wasn't just about the romantic gestures or the passionate declarations. It was about standing together in the face of adversity, about choosing each other over and over again, even when the world seemed to be against us. Our journey hadn't been easy, but it had brought us to this moment, to a love that was stronger and more profound than I could have ever imagined. And as I drifted off to sleep, I knew that no matter what the future held, we would face it together, our love a beacon that would guide us through the darkest of times.